Love, Not Luck. Written by Melanie Jacobson. Narrated by Andrea Coomer. Chapter 1. Lucy Dalton stepped into the Fortune Cafe and took a breath of fresh air. Really, the breeze from the ocean outside the quaint restaurant's windows should have been fresh air, but it wasn't with Blake around. And he'd be rejoining her and her parents any moment now. Whatever was making her fiance cranky clung to him like a fog that even the seashell beach breezes couldn't blow away. Her mother touched her back, the light touch she'd used to say, "I'm here," ever since Lucy was little. She turned for the hug Beth Dalton would give without being asked. Her mom smelled like beautiful, the perfume she'd worn since forever. The scent soothed Lucy's frayed nerves better than a Xanax until a loud clatter sounded behind them, and they both jumped. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry." A waitress, her brown eyes crinkled in major distress, bent to yank an overturned platter out of the way. "I've never done that before. It's lucky you moved right then, or you'd have sweet and sour sauce all over you right now." She restacked the tray while waving a busboy over to help her contain the mess. "Lucky," Blake said behind her. "Yeah, she's definitely that." Lucy flinched and turned. She hadn't heard him come in. "Hey, you find a parking spot okay?" She looked past him for his parents, trying to gauge how many moments she had before they walked in, and the tension ratcheted up again. Blake nodded and jammed his fists in the pockets of his golf shorts. "We can't all find the spot closest to the door every single time, but I did all right." It was a dig. She'd gotten a spot right by the door. For a split second, she'd considered passing it up because she didn't want to annoy him, but her parents would have wondered why she was parking farther away. Her dad cleared his throat, but her mom put her hand on his arm to keep him from saying anything. Lucy hoped her mom could read the thank you she was trying to send with her eyes. Her dad should probably be sainted based on how often he'd bitten his tongue since the Seftons, Blake's family, showed up. But she needed her dad to keep the peace just a little longer. The Seftons would get on the road and they could all breathe easier. The door opened again and admitted Deborah Sefton, who looked like she'd caught a whiff of something rancid despite the hints of sweet and spicy wafting from the kitchen, and Calvin, who tapped out something on his phone like he was trying to punish whoever the message was for with his angry fingers. This would be so much nicer if Blake's parents hadn't come. Guilt churned her stomach for a second. The Seftons had decided to fly in for the venue walkthrough when they heard Lucy's parents were driving up from LA. It was good they were taking an active interest, even if Lucy's dad looked like he wanted to choke Calvin Sefton every time he voiced an opinion. And Calvin had a lot of them, from how liberals were killing America to how the sky was the wrong shade of blue in Seashell Beach. Seriously. "It's just wedding stress," she reminded herself. The Seftons would be different when the wedding was done. They all just had to get through it and they'd settle down to a good groove with each other. Right now, the best policy was overlooking their quirks and surviving the weekend without any drama. She smiled at the server, faking enough of her famous perkiness to set the waitress at ease. "No problem. Accidents happen." The other girl's expression relaxed a fraction. "Let me get you guys to a table." She scooped up an armful of menus and led them to a table with an ocean view. Lucy thought she heard Blake's mom, Deborah, say something about low-rent places, but Lucy took a deep breath and kept walking, glad her parents weren't close enough to hear the unfair comment. The Fortune Cafe wasn't a Michelin-starred bistro with menu items she couldn't pronounce, much less pick out of a lineup. But the cafe wasn't trying to be that kind of restaurant. It was a sweet little place with an eclectic blend of scruffy beach hospitality and clean Asian lines that appealed to her need for order. The reviews had been outstanding, and Lucy wouldn't let Deborah's snobbery ruin it for her. Her stomach churned again. More guilt. Deborah was used to a high standard of living and always getting her way, but she'd had to make a lot of compromises for this wedding. Namely, not having any control over it. If Deborah indulged in some passive-aggressive remarks here and there, or even about every single thing they'd done so far that morning, Lucy would overlook it. Blake had begged Lucy to let his mom do more, but as much as Lucy wanted to please her future mother-in-law, she couldn't let go of the reins of the most important event of her life. She spent all her time making other people's visions a reality in the opulent ballrooms of the San Francisco Duchess Hotel as their staff event planner. There was no way she could give up control of her own wedding day and trust someone else to make her dream come true. The waitress set their menus on the table. "My name is Emma, and I'll be right back with some ice water and hot tea while you look over our wine selection. Is there anything else I can get for you?" The Seftons ignored Emma, but Lucy's parents assured her that water and tea would be fine. 2 minutes of quiet followed as everyone looked at the drink menu or their phones and tried to avoid conversation. So few of them had gone well today that Lucy couldn't blame them. But it was a loud silence. She rubbed her lucky jade pendant, hoping for some miracle that would allow her parents and her future in-laws to find common ground. If they didn't, the next couple decades could get sticky. Crap. She wished she could go back out and breathe the ocean air for a minute. Apparently, fresh air for her was wherever everyone else was not. Emma returned with a tray of ice waters and a hot kettle. The shuffle of everyone moving tableware around to accommodate the water glasses made the silence less painful. Deborah didn't even complain that the tea wasn't whatever brand she normally overpaid for at Tivana. Lucy patted the lucky jade. Emma rattled off the day's specials, both local fish, describing them so well Lucy had no idea how she was going to decide. "This all looks good," Lucy's mom said when Emma left with the promise to return soon for their orders. Lucy appreciated the effort since her mom preferred Mexican food to Chinese. "How does the song go? Try some of column A, try all of column B," her dad joked. "Do they really have columns?" Deborah asked. Her mouth pinched as if she'd already tasted something bad as she picked up the menu to investigate. "No, not really," her dad said, and it sounded an awful lot like he'd ground the words out through gritted teeth. "I wish they did," Blake said. If only he'd interrupted to smooth the waters. But no. "This is all that pretentious fusion crap that you can't get away from in San Francisco." "Damn straight," Calvin Sefton added. "None of these new chefs are much more than cooks with ADD and no one to tell them when an idea is bad. No one trains in the classic French tradition anymore. This place needs a Hubert Keller." Lucy refrained from pointing out that a French chef doing Chinese food would definitely be considered fusion. "I don't think that's what they're going for," her mom said, keeping her tone conversational. "And I see all my favorites here. Mushu, cashew chicken, beef and broccoli." None of those were her mother's favorites, but Lucy appreciated her efforts to calm the Seftons. Blake didn't. "If you're going to make beef and broccoli, just make it. Why do you have to tell me it's hand-picked broccolini harvested by little Enrique in the exotic fields of Santa Maria, who raised it from a seedling and cried when he plucked it from Mother Earth?" Calvin barked out a laugh and slapped his son on the back. There was a flash of the humor that had drawn Lucy to Blake when he'd attended one of the swanky events hosted by his firm at the Duchess. But she didn't like the edge in his voice now. His sarcasm had outweighed his real jokes more and more lately. She drew a deep breath. It's got great word of mouth. I'm sure the lunch will be fine, and then we can spend the afternoon tackling the flower situation while the men golf. The look on her dad's face almost made her laugh. It's like how Yancey, her parents' beagle, might have looked when he had to get past Fluffers, the family cat, to reach his favorite chew toy. Her dad loved to golf, but the price of Calvin's company might be too high to pay for the opportunity. The instinct to laugh faded. She'd wanted this weekend to be perfect since perfection was her niche, and she was having a hard time adjusting to the potholes they kept hitting. It had started the moment the Seftons had climbed out of their huge Mercedes under the portico at the Mariposa Hotel. Blake had called to let her know they were pulling in, and she'd rushed down to meet the car, excited to show them around. She'd been so sure Deborah would overcome some of her misgivings about the location once she saw it. She was wrong. Lucy had dreamed about her perfect wedding since she was little, but Deborah had been dreaming even longer about the perfect wedding for Blake. And Deborah wanted a glamorous wine country setting, not a quiet out-of-the-way beach. The complaints had started the second her foot had touched the concrete, always phrased so passive-aggressively that it was almost an art form. "Good morning, Lucy. Well, I'm sure your guests won't mind that there's no valet service here." A valet hovered in the background, in fact. But Lucy had been so anxious to welcome them that she'd rushed forward to open Deborah's door herself. When they'd walked down to the small cove where the ceremony would be held, Deborah had kept her Tory birch pumps on even after Lucy had offered to wait while she switched to sandals. Calvin had snorted, like the idea of owning sandals was ridiculous, and Lucy bit her tongue as she thought of her father's well-worn flip-flop collection. Down on the beach, when Deborah finally had to sit on a rock to dump the sand out, she'd watched it trickle out in a thin stream and said, "Sand has its own charm." Her mom had tried to run interference for Lucy all day. After the sand comment, she'd squeezed Lucy and turned her to face the ocean. "This is spectacular, and the only thing that could be more breathtaking is you standing in front of it in your wedding gown." Even her mom was worn down by now. Lucy hoped the food would come quickly, because it would be a miracle if a fight didn't break out over the ordering. "Blake, sweetie, did you see the mooshu pork? Maybe they could put that in lettuce and it will be like those lettuce wraps you like at that one place in Chinatown." He set his menu down to stare at her, disbelief on his face. "Nothing in this place is going to be like anything in Chinatown." "Which is fine," her dad said, his voice daring anyone to argue. "Is there anything you think you can tolerate on this menu, Blake? Maybe you should spend some quiet time studying it until you find it." "Now wait just a minute," Calvin said, for once picking up on the mood. "It's fine, Dad," Blake said, looking down at the menu. His tone was even, but the skin along his cheekbones had reddened, and Lucy's stomach clenched. Navigating this whole lunch was like steering the Titanic, knowing full well there was no way to get the ship off the iceberg. Emma reappeared, and Lucy wanted to kiss her for the distraction. "You guys ready to order?" "I suppose," Deborah said with zero enthusiasm. "I'll have the lemongrass chicken," Lucy said. "It sounds good." "It is," Emma said, her smile looking slightly forced in the face of Deborah's coolness. "It's a twist on the fried and breaded dish you'll find in most Chinese restaurants." "Is this even a Chinese restaurant?" Blake asked. "Fortune Cafe is... it is what it wants to be, I guess." And that's mostly Chinese food and whatever else sounds good, Emma said, her real smile back. The rest of the table ordered without incident, although the Seftons sounded like they were requesting root canals. Lucy wanted to keep Emma there forever so everyone would behave. The unofficial truce at the table was a bubble in her hand, ready to burst with one wrong move. But Emma left despite Lucy's telepathic begging, and she caught a look of relief on the waitress's face as she fled for the kitchen. Lucy couldn't blame her. She was surrounded by people she either loved or was supposed to love, and she couldn't understand how everything had gone so wrong. She'd been drawing on her deepest reserves, the ones she had to rely on when she faced particularly difficult corporate customers at the Duchess, to navigate all the wedding logistics with her in-laws. It was hard enough to overlook Deborah's passive-aggressive comments, but Blake's mood had deteriorated as the day wore on. Instead of feeling like they were a team, Lucy had to spend more and more energy managing him. And they still had dinner to get through later. She'd expected wedding planning to be stressful, yes, but wasn't there supposed to be some kind of underlying joy? "Excuse me, I left something in the car. I'll be back in a minute," she said, glad she'd insisted on driving separately from the Seftons. She didn't even care that it was an excuse as thin as a moushu pancake. She needed a couple of minutes to compose herself before dealing any more with Deborah's lemon face. She reached her car and leaned against it, trying to sort out her head. She felt swampy, a glob of sticky, unpleasant feelings, mainly toward Blake. This would have been a rough enough day if it was his first time acting like this, but it wasn't. Over the last couple of months, this surly version of him showed up way more than the high-energy funny guy she'd fallen in love with the year before. She'd seen this happen with some of her friends. Wedding stress put everyone on edge. Then the big day happened, it was beautiful, and everything settled back to normal. But she didn't remember any of her friends' fiancés staying in a permanent bad mood the way Blake was. Several times she'd gotten so tired of it she'd had to fight the urge to get up and walk out of whatever space they were sharing. His space or her space. Or the restaurant table with their parents, apparently. Shame she'd lost that fight. She took a few deep breaths and focused on the objective for the rest of the afternoon. Ignore Deborah's barbs, be patient with Blake's mood, and keep her dad from blowing up. She rested her head on her arms on top of the car, glad she couldn't be seen from their table inside. She stayed that way for a minute or two, surprised that it helped to be still and quiet. The soft scuff of shoes on concrete sounded, and she looked up at her mom approaching. The worry she'd been trying to hide all day written all over her face. "You doing okay, sweetheart?" Beth asked, once again resting her hand on Lucy's back. "I am," Lucy said. "I promise." "This is not how you act when you're doing okay. Tell me what's going on." Lucy sighed and turned to face her mother. "I'm sorry they're being kind of rotten. Debbie's still not over the location and Calvin is... Calvin. And Blake?" Her mom said it carefully, the way someone might offer a breath mint to someone who needs it while trying not to offend them. "Blake," Lucy repeated, sagging against the car. "Blake is overwhelmed." Her mom stepped closer and rubbed Lucy's upper arms like she had when Lucy had needed comforting after some kid trauma. "Is it the wedding planning or the wedding?" Lucy shut her eyes as the words bounced around her head. "Is it the wedding? Is it the wedding? Is it the wedding?" Her mom had given voice to a fear that had been dogging Lucy for almost a month. What if this didn't get better after the wedding? And even scarier, why was it stressing him out so much? She was handling all the details, so why was he getting more wound up the closer it got? She couldn't run away from the question with her mother asking it to her face. "He's not like this, Mom. You saw how he was last summer." They'd been dating almost 6 months when Blake had told her he thought it was time for them to meet each other's families. They'd spent the 4th of July with her parents in LA, oohing and ahhing as the fireworks exploded over their neighborhood park, and laughing around nightly meals of grilled carne asada from their favorite carniceria. "Honey, I don't want you to think we don't like Blake. We do. I'm not comfortable with what we're seeing today, but we trust you. If this is what you want, I have no doubt you're making the right decision. I guess I'm just asking if you're sure." Lucy straightened and smoothed her hair behind her shoulders, the fine blonde strands the same corn silk color as her mom's, sliding coolly over her fingers. "I'm sure. But I'm going to be really glad when this wedding is done and we don't have to stress about it anymore. I want my normal life back." Her mom opened her mouth, closed it, and squeezed her arms again. "Nothing about your life has ever been normal, Lucky Lucy, and it doesn't have to be. Ready to go in and eat?" Lucy eyed the restaurant door. "Ready as I'll ever be," and she hoped she had just told the truth. Chapter 2. Emma was just arriving with their food when they reached the table. Emma set each dish in front of its owner, and everyone tucked into their lunches. "This is excellent, sweetheart. Good choice," her dad said. "I like mine," Calvin agreed, and the stress around her dad's eyes eased. Maybe an afternoon of golf together would be doable after all. Deborah said nothing, which Lucy took as a victory, and she savored her next bite. It was as good as anything she'd had in the city. "Mine tastes weird," Blake said, and Lucy's peaceful bubble popped. She rubbed her necklace, wondering what kind of luck it would take to turn Blake's mood around. It was rarely a conscious habit anymore, rubbing the necklace. She did it when something lucky happened, which it often did for her. And she rubbed it when she needed something lucky to happen, which it often would. And sometimes she rubbed it when she needed to steady her nerves, like now. "Let me try it. Pork can be tricky." She speared a piece and took a bite. It was perfect, not fatty or dry. "What is it you don't like? It tastes pretty awesome to me." His face darkened and she tightened her grip on her necklace, the smooth stone warm from her fingers. The gold setting around the jade bit into her palm. Suddenly, Blake's fork fell to his plate with a clatter so loud that Lucy jumped, and her necklace snapped. "You have opinions about everything," he said. "You want an opinion on the food at our reception? Fine, but can we leave my lunch out of it today?" The plea was so tired she couldn't be angry, despite her dad's reddening face. She looked from him down to the stone in her hand, the one she'd worn next to her heart ever since her granddad had brought it to her after a business trip to China when she was 12. She never took it off, had even chosen jade silk bridesmaids' gowns to match it, since she'd be wearing it with her wedding dress. Tears pricked her eyes. She wasn't much of a crier, but she hadn't owned the necklace for 16 years out of habit. It was like having her grandfather always near her, and staring down at the 2 disconnected pieces of the chain made him feel very far away. She picked it up to study it more closely, mostly to avoid eye contact with anyone that might make her burst into tears. It backfired because now she could see that she had bent the setting too when she gripped it so hard. She sniffed. She couldn't help it. Blake sighed and kept his eyes on his plate as he cut his pork into unnecessarily small pieces. "Does this have to be a situation? I love a drama-free lunch." A dead quiet blanketed the table and he looked up, his eyes darkening as he saw the broken necklace in Lucy's hand and the tears trying to escape her. Oh no, can I see it? He held out his hand for the necklace, but she pulled her hand back. No. His eyebrows shot up at her terse answer. I know you love that thing, but it's not an omen. I promise. Her dad's hands curled into fists on the table, and he began to push himself up. You don't understand. Lucy shot to her feet first, knowing her dad had hit his limit with Blake for the day. It's okay, Dad. We passed the jewelry shop up the street earlier. I think those places usually do repairs. I'll drop this off, and when we get back, Mom and Deborah and I can meet with the Mariposa catering manager. Her dad eased himself back in his chair, looking like he wanted to crush the table in the death grip he had on its edge, but he said nothing else. Go ahead and drop that thing off, Calvin said. We'll finish up lunch. Lucy's not finished, Dad, Blake said. His dad frowned. She isn't eating anything anyway. She can grab something later if she's hungry. Let her go handle her necklace, and I'll settle the check. Normally, her dad would have waved him off and insisted on paying. He loved to treat people. But he only stared at Blake's dad in stony silence, and her mom made a subtle shooing motion. I'll be back in a few minutes, Lucy said, scooping up her handbag and escaping outside. On the sidewalk, she straightened her Lily Pulitzer sheath, chosen to impress Deborah, who had an eye for designer pieces. An odd hollowness had ballooned in Lucy's chest when the necklace broke, heightening every sound around her. It was fear, and it made no sense. Standing in the sunshine, she paused to take a couple more deep breaths. It's a necklace, and it can be fixed. It's not an omen. But Blake's words didn't comfort her. Anyway, maybe it was an omen. So what? She walked up Tangerine Street towards Spyglass Jewelry, feeling better for taking the steps. She was in control of this now, and she would make things happen. If it was an omen, she'd had 1,000 good ones to this single bad one. Didn't everyone say she was the luckiest girl they knew? Something would happen to offset the broken jade piece, but it was smart to get it fixed quickly no matter what. She picked up her pace and pushed the door to Spyglass open with a sense of relief. A woman her age looked up from behind the counter with a smile. Hi, beautiful day, isn't it? Yeah. The weather was great, even if she hadn't had 3 minutes of uncomplicated time to enjoy it. Do you do jewelry repairs? If it's fixable, I can do it, the woman said. What can I help you with? I just broke my necklace. It's got a ton of sentimental value, and I want to get it fixed as soon as possible. The woman held her hand out. Let me take a look. Lucy tried not to fidget as she looked it over, turning it slowly to study it from every angle. What's your name? The woman asked. Lucy. Hi, Lucy. I'm Stella. This is a beautiful piece. Thank you. Can you fix it? I have a similar chain I could replace it with, so that's no problem. The setting will be a little trickier. I can do it, but if you want it done right, I need to take my time with it. I'd rather stay with this chain. I've had this since I was 12. My grandfather gave it to me and nicknamed me Lucky Lucy. Ever since he did that, it's kind of come true. Using a different chain, even if it was identical, wouldn't feel the same. Am I being insanely high maintenance? Stella smiled. No, I can fix the chain too. Thank you so much. I go back to San Francisco tomorrow afternoon. Do you think you'll have it done by then? Stella was already shaking her head. I have other orders I need to handle first. I'll pay extra, Lucy said, desperation licking at her and forcing the words out in a wheedling tone that made her cringe. This was high maintenance. Stella's eyes softened, but she only handed back the necklace. I'm so sorry. I know it's important to you, but I can't push other clients' work aside to get to it. I can recommend a jeweler in San Francisco. Lucy took a step back from the necklace Stella held out to her. I'm sorry. I'm really embarrassed for making it sound like I think my stuff is more important. This probably sounds like the dumbest thing ever, but I was down the street having lunch with my fiance and our parents when this broke. It already wasn't going great, and when this happened, it freaked me out a little. No need to apologize, Stella said, her smile back. I totally get it. Lucy had a feeling Stella really did understand why Lucy needed the necklace whole again, not an imitation of it. She took a deep breath. As much as she hated the idea of leaving the necklace 4 hours south of home, she wanted Stella and only Stella to do the repair. I'm a grown-up. I can wait. Go ahead and fill out this repair slip and I'll give you an estimate on time and cost. Lucy filled it out while Stella scrolled through her computer. I have a couple of complicated commissions to do first, but then I'll move this to the top of my list. Should only be a few weeks. A few weeks? Lucy leaned her hand on the counter for support. Weeks? She wished she could snap her fingers and have it repair itself. She smiled at the thought. Some of her friends would have sworn that the jade piece was magic, but Lucy wouldn't go that far. There was no denying her long run of spectacular luck since Grandpa Max gave it to her. But to call it outright magic was too superstitious, even for her, and that was saying something. She left with Stella's assurances to restore it to as good as new and pushed back through the door of the Fortune Cafe. Proud, she only paused for a second to consider walking right past it. But she couldn't abandon her parents to Deborah and Calvin. Emma had delivered a small plate of fortune cookies. Good. She needed a pick-me-up. You okay? Her mom asked in a low voice when she rejoined them. Deborah rolled her eyes, which did not seem like the classiest thing in the world to do for someone who prided herself on sophistication. Lucy pretended she hadn't seen it and mustered a smile for her mom. Sure, it's just a necklace, right? It's not, her dad said, squeezing her hand. I know you love that necklace, and I know you feel like it's your good luck charm, but I'll make sure you have enough other good luck charms until you get it back. Start with this. I can tell it's the best one. He plucked a fortune cookie up and handed it to her. Watch this, Dad, Blake said, his first true smile of the day appearing. We'll all get those lame advice fortunes, and Lucy's will say something that actually comes true. It's wild, but it happens every time. Even Deborah looked interested by that and scooped up a cookie. I'll start, Calvin said. The wise man hears more than he speaks. That's not a fortune. Deborah went next. Kindness is the greatest commodity. Another eye roll. Maybe fortune means something different in Chinese. Lucy couldn't help thinking that her future in-laws had gotten the perfect piece of advice for themselves if they ever bothered to listen. Her mom cleared her throat and read, There is no greater treasure than the love of a child. Well, that's the absolute truth. I'm a rich woman, she said, leaning over to drop a kiss on Lucy's cheek. Mine says, look no further than your own home to find your greatest gifts. Sounds to me like whoever wrote these fortunes knows us well, her dad said. Lucy snuck a glance at Deborah. Calvin wouldn't have caught the dig, but Deborah's eyes had narrowed as she tried to figure out if Lucy's dad had insulted her. Yikes, evasive maneuvers. She prayed her fiance would cooperate. What about yours, Blake? He scanned the slip from his cookie, his eyes widening in surprise. Check it out. Mine says I'll get a promotion soon. This is usually the kind of fortune Lucy gets, and then hers come true. What does yours say, babe? Lucy pulled the slip from her cookie. True love is for the brave, not the lucky. More anxiety washed over her. Had she and Blake gotten each other's fortunes? This was the kind of fortune her friends had gotten by the fistful over the years, but not Lucy. Hers were always specific. She'd been told once that a large sum of money was coming to her, and the next week she'd gotten $10,000 from a winning lottery ticket she'd pitched in to buy to appease one of her staffers. Twice she'd gotten fortunes promising her promotions that came almost immediately. She'd even gotten a fortune predicting she would find love by nightfall, and 3 hours later she'd met Blake at the Duchess. Blake laughed. "I guess I got your cookie. It's good to know you're human like the rest of us." To get a generic fortune like anyone else's was more than a little disturbing, but Blake disliked her superstitions, and she wasn't interested in upsetting his first good mood in days. "Words to live by, I guess," she said, her smile still in place. She tucked the fortune into her wallet. "You keep them?" Deborah asked. "Yeah, she plays the lottery numbers on the back. She wins a couple $100 at least half the time. It's crazy," Blake said. "We better go," Lucy said, pushing back from the table. Embarrassed that Blake had told Deborah she bought lotto tickets. It was just something Lucy did for fun with her staffers, but Deborah's expression made it clear that Seftons and those marrying Seftons did not play the numbers. Even more than wanting to make their appointment at their hotel, Lucy wanted to be done with this lunch. So done. Back at the hotel lobby, the men separated to go change into their golf clothes, and Lucy took a deep breath before slipping each of her arms into those of the women beside her and plunging into a long afternoon as Deborah and the catering manager went the rounds. She could not wait until this wedding was over and life got back to normal. Chapter 3. Lucy had never been so glad to be at work than when she walked in Tuesday morning. The long weekend at Seashell Beach had defied the laws of physics. While the time with her parents had sped by so fast she was sure it was violating some of Einstein's principles, the same time with Blake's parents had dragged so slowly that she wondered if it were possible to age a lifetime in a single afternoon. But she was back at the Duchess, and this was her groove. She'd bought a lottery ticket from the newsstand nearest her BART stop, and she scratched it off before officially starting her day. A couple $100 to buy her staff lunch as a thank you for covering for her would go a long way toward restoring order to the universe. The scratcher turned up zeros. She stared for a full minute before crumpling it and dropping it in her trash can. She drowned the lick of fear in her stomach with a long swallow of coffee and waded into her voicemail. The day would turn around. It always did. Not this time. It only got worse by lunchtime. The ladies of Nob Hill's semi-annual brunch was a disaster when the chairwoman wanted documentation that the poached salmon had been sustainably fished. The chef had no answer to that, and the 100-person brunch was served without the premier dish to the grumbling of the ladies present. But somehow it was the Duchess's fault, even though documentation had not once been raised by the chairwoman during the menu selection weeks before. But these were ladies with a great deal of influence in San Francisco society. So Lucy sent several of her staffers on a desperate run to the flower market to gather bouquets for the women. She'd presented them herself with her apologies. The brunch would now end up costing the hotel because the chairwoman felt they shouldn't have to pay for the fish, but Lucy could only hope the move with the flowers was enough to offset any complaints that might filter through the ladies' social set and put people off from future bookings. The hotel needed the opulent wedding receptions that came out of this bunch, and Lucy couldn't burn any bridges. By the time her workday ended, she felt more like she'd just failed to broker peace with Sudanese warlords than like she'd managed the events office. A high-end luxury import company had hosted a preview for its biggest Bay Area buyers, and the AV system had glitched so badly that the trainer had stormed off the stage in protest. And she'd had a cancellation for an event in the fall that would have earned the hotel into the 6 figures in revenue. On that call, she'd reached up to rub her lucky jade to remind her that it was going to be all right, and almost broke into tears when her fingers found nothing. Now she was walking the 2 blocks to her apartment from the BART stop with her shoes in her hands because one of the heels had snapped off. She alternated between trying not to think too hard about what the stains on the sidewalk might be and trying not to cry. When she limped into the vestibule of her building, it was all she could do not to collapse in front of the mailboxes and stay there until she mossed over. Instead, she fumbled her mail key from her purse and shoved it into her mailbox. It would no doubt be full of notices that she owed money to the DMV or the IRS, but she dropped them on her foyer table and deal with it later. This night called for crawling into bed for a Netflix marathon. The mail key stuck, and she cursed. The refined ladies of the Nob Hill Society would have fallen over their perfectly sauced eggs if they'd heard the words coming out of her mouth. But she did not care. She couldn't take one more thing going wrong, and she would bend this mailbox to her will if it was the last thing she did. She jammed the key into the lock again and swore even louder when her hand slipped, breaking her middle fingernail. She stepped back and held it up to inspect the damage. "Seriously, I'm sorry for whatever I did," a warm voice said from the lobby entrance. "No need to flip me off." It was her neighbor Carter, and he approached the mailboxes with a grin. She dropped her hand and laughed. "At least now you know how I really feel. What's up, Lucky Lucy? I feel like I never see you around anymore." "Probably because I'm never around anymore," she said, barely stifling a sigh. "Wedding planning? Not my favorite." "Even for the event queen extraordinaire, huh? If you can't hack it, the rest of us are screwed." She smiled again. "Hack. Good word. I'm hacked off. I would like to hack a few people." He stopped short and backed up, pushing his hair out of his eyes. On his best days, it looked like a nest of vaguely related cowlicks, so it fell back exactly where it had been. "I'll just be going now." "You're not one of them. Stay, get your mail. Enjoy the lovely surroundings." "How gracious of you. This kind of hospitality must be why they pay you the big bucks." Lucy only shook her head. Whatever tech thing he did paid him enough to live on the same floor of the medium nice-ish building that she did, but he still liked to tease her about her high-roller job. It was a good job, one that she could parlay into a great job, but not if she had too many more incidents like today. She'd parlay herself right into the street, whether it was her fault or not. The thought depressed her again, and she decided her mail could wait. "Where you going, Lucy Lou?" Carter called after her, his brown eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'm not scaring you off with my bad luck funk, am I?" It was a running joke between them. Carter had been a disaster since he'd moved in the summer before. Anything that could go wrong for him did. Broken pipes, missed deliveries, birds breaking his window, and a bedbug problem that never seemed to affect anyone else. All of those incidents had bypassed Lucy, but they'd still made her wary of pushing her own good luck too much by association. She hadn't said it in so many words, but one of her girlfriends, tipsy on wine, had told Carter all about Lucy's luck as they chatted over the balcony. He'd teased her about it ever since. Lucy mustered another smile for him. "You're not scaring me off. In fact, you should maybe run from me. I've never had such a bad day at work." "Sorry to hear that." He looked up from his envelope shuffling. "Want to talk about it?" Everything that could go wrong did, plus a dozen things that shouldn't have, all the way down to this. She stuck her broken nail up again. I said I was sorry. Sometimes a girl just needs to flip someone off, you know? Yes, do it again. I'll even act offended to make you feel better. She lowered it instead. I don't remember ever breaking a nail before. I'll have to cut them all off so they don't look completely stupid with one stubby nail. Or maybe I can just get one acrylic nail on stubby for my wedding. Can you even do that? Not my area of expertise, sorry. But I know a lot about being unlucky. I can tell you some of the perks. Yes, please, she said, realizing that more than crawling into bed, she needed a good laugh. Meet you on the balcony? See you there in 10. Deal. He gave her a salute and headed up the stairs. She gave the mailbox a final try and got it open to find 3 bills. No party invitations or thank you notes or even really good coupons. Oh well, at least this day was almost over. Lucy climbed to her 3rd-floor apartment and opened her door on the first try with a disproportionate sense of relief. What had her life become in one short weekend that opening a door lock without difficulty felt like a major victory? Inside the door, she dropped her new bills on the small accent table she'd found one weekend while hitting garage sales with her friends. They'd gone on a whim because none of them had done it since they were kids. While her friends all laughed at the kitschy stuff they found, she'd picked up this embellished table. Her friends had teased her for spending $15 on it, but she got the last laugh when it turned out to be an authentic Art Deco piece worth almost $1,000. Minutes later, in her comfiest pajamas, she slid open her back door and stepped out onto her tiny balcony. It was barely big enough for 2 chairs and a table, but she loved it anyway. Any time the San Francisco fog lifted, she could see the Golden Gate Bridge, especially when it was lit up at night. It would still be a couple of hours before it shone, but sitting out here with Carter to make her laugh felt like a pretty decent consolation prize. Running into him at the mailboxes, minus the accidental flip-off, was her first piece of decent luck all day. He emerged on his identical balcony and smiled at her. You didn't have to get dressed up on my account, says the guy who lives in shorts and free t-shirts. He looked offended. Hey, I like... He stared down at his chest. Boom tax. One of my favorite... software programs? You don't even know what it is? It's one of my favorite programs, he said, his tone full of fake conviction. Tell me about them. They will, see, you give them, I don't know what they do. Blow up your taxes, maybe. Like I need help with that, he said, and it made her laugh. Aren't you supposed to be out here telling me why being unlucky is going to be the awesomest thing that ever happened to me? The perks are substantial. I'm not sure I want to share them. I don't want you in this club. She shrugged. I'm here for a while whether either of us likes it or not. Might as well show me around. His sigh was the same sound Blake's mother had made at least a dozen times over the weekend. Fine. First of all, it'll get you lots of women. They feel sorry for you and it brings out their nurturing instincts. Not sure I need help pulling chicks, neighbor. Got anything else? Yeah. Free massages and new outfits are a pretty regular deal if you have bad luck. Every time you fly now, you're going to get picked for a TSA pat-down, so there's your massage. And the airline will permanently lose your luggage, so you buy new outfits. She tried to keep a straight face. I'll stick with carry-ons. Doesn't help. They've lost my carry-on. Twice, he said, holding up 3 fingers and making her laugh again. Just focus on the shopping you'll get to do to replace everything. Several times. That sounds pretty fabulous. What else? I meet new people almost every time I leave the house. Granted, they're paramedics, but depending on how complicated the extrication is, they can be pretty nice. Extrication? What? Wait, I don't think you're joking about that one. She'd seen him in an orthopedic boot and an arm cast at different points in the last year. I'm not joking about any of it. People really don't understand all the advantages of bad luck. It gives you superpowers. Like, all I have to do to make it rain is go on a bike ride, and it'll be pouring before I'm halfway done. A bubble of laughter rose up in Lucy's chest. Poor you. Poor me? Did I mention the increased popularity? Once people catch on that you're one of us, you're going to double your friend circle. They think it's super handy to have us around. Try going to the movies with your friends. If they get in a different ticket line, no matter how long it is, they'll get in twice as fast as you do. By now, she couldn't stop laughing. I get it. I didn't even get to your improved cardiovascular health because you will never get a close parking spot. Anywhere. Ever. That one stung. She sat up. I think I want out of this club. How'd you get in, anyway? Her hand crept up to the empty hollow at the base of her neck. She wondered if this felt a tiny bit like phantom limb pain. She couldn't process that her lucky Jade was 200 miles south. Today's string of crappy events was just an aberration, she knew. Everyone had bad days, even if she couldn't remember having one like this before. But she'd still feel better when her necklace was back. Guess I just got lucky. He choked on the drink he'd brought out with him. Good one. Thanks. He set the drink down and turned to face her, his shoulders squared like he was bracing himself to ask or tell her something. But his cell phone rang and a saved-by-the-bell look crossed his face. Sorry, I might need to take this. He glanced down at the call display, and his eyes flashed almost as brightly as the glow of the screen. Hello? Yes, this is Carter Mackey. He listened, and his lips went from upturned edges to a Cheshire-level grin within seconds. You're kidding. That's amazing. No, thank you. You won't be sorry. Lucy wondered if she should step inside to give him some privacy. But Carter shot her a smile that suggested he had no worries in the world, least of all her presence on the balcony. Holy crap, he said when he hung up, and it was the exact same way she'd said it when she won the $10,000 lottery. Everything okay? She asked. Everything is beyond okay. What's the word for that? Splendiferous? He made a face, but his grin wouldn't have come off with a jackhammer. Less girly. Super fantastic? Awesome. Stupendous? Incredible. Crazy cool, she said, getting into the spirit. Life-changing, he shouted, and threw his arms in the air like he'd just won an Olympic sprint. Hooray! She shouted back. What are we celebrating? He shoved his hands through his hair. She hadn't thought it could look any crazier, but the strands poked out through his fingers like his hair had done meth. I can't believe it, he said, and his hair was a wild nest of exclamation points, testifying to his shock. I won! I won! What did you win? I pitched an idea for an educational app, kind of an interactive game version of the Khan Academy. I just got the grant that's going to let me work on it. Wow! I don't think I knew you did that kind of thing. He smiled, and a look she couldn't read crossed his face. I think there's probably a lot you don't know about me. Fair enough. And congratulations. Seriously, that's awesome. Thanks. I've developed at least a dozen apps that do all the new economy stuff like connecting users with services, and that's kind of fun. I know a couple of them have been great for small businesses, but I've been wanting to do something educational for a while now. I just couldn't afford to not work on the profit-driving apps while I developed it. Now I can get it done way faster and not stress about making rent. That's huge. Their medium-nice building by San Francisco standards meant they had really high rent. Lucky guy. Yeah, I think I like this role reversal. She smiled, glad for him, but not able to say the same of their switch without it tasting like a lie on her tongue. Your app will be amazing. You sound pretty confident for someone who's never seen my work. She shrugged. I know quality people when I see them, and quality people do quality work. It'll be great. And on that note, I think I'm going to go in and sleep off this day. See you around, Carter. See you around, he said, watching her more intently than usual. She slid open her door and was halfway through it when he called her name. She poked her head back out. Yeah? It was great hanging out with you. This time her smile came easily. Yeah, you too. She closed the door and shook her head. It hadn't taken her long after Carter moved in to realize he was a lightning rod for bad juju to strike, and she'd always kept a polite distance. But her parting words to him were true. Her former bad luck neighbor had just become the only bright spot in her day. Chapter 4. On Thursday, Lucy trudged home in even worse shape than she had 2 days before when she'd had to carry her shoes in her hands. She hadn't thought that day could be any worse, but Thursday was making Tuesday look like a good dream. She reached the porch and stared up the 5 steps to the main door of her building. Might as well be Everest for all the energy she had. But if she didn't go up the steps, she couldn't fall into bed and let the huge tank behind her eyeballs drain its salty tears. She needed her bed for that. Her bed and a full day off work. Or 2. What was the standard amount of personal leave for someone who had just been dumped by her fiance? Because right now, staying in bed for the rest of her life sounded fan-freaking-tastic. Borderline mental breakdown aside, no way was she going to stand on the sidewalk looking as blank-eyed as the street people who regularly wandered by. She forced herself up the stairs, counting them down like they were the end of her 100 daily crunches. 4 more, 3 more, 2, 1. She shoved her key into the lock and turned it. Nothing happened. She held up the key ring and squinted. She'd definitely used the right key. She bit back a growl and inserted it again. It turned halfway, then the tumbler resisted. What the... After a dozen more attempts, she let out a frustrated yell that made her look as crazy as Shoe Man, the homeless guy who staked out their corner and fondled the same old pink Reebok like a bunny for hours a day. She pounded the locked metal door with the side of her fist. It rattled and stayed locked. For 2 seconds, it felt good to lose control and hit it. Then it hurt like hell, and once the first tear leaked out, the tank broke wide open and she sank down on the top step, too worn out to even make noise as she cried. She knew she should care about whether the tears stopped before one of the neighbors came home, but she didn't. She leaned her head against the wall and let them flow, too tired to hold her head up, too tired to even hold her eyelids open. She had no idea how long she'd been sitting there by the time Carter called her name. Lucy? What's wrong? Are you hurt? Lucy? He stood at the bottom of the stairs, one of his hands reaching out like he was ready to brace her if she slid off the top step. She blinked and processed the question. Was she hurt? A laugh sob escaped her. Yeah, she was hurt, but not how he meant. "I'm not hurt," she said, and her voice came out thick and swollen. He climbed up to sit beside her, careful to leave several inches between them, like he was approaching a wild animal he didn't want to startle. "You going to be okay?" She liked that he hadn't asked her if she was okay, just if she was going to be okay. Why did people ask if someone clearly in the throes of their world crashing down was okay? His was a much smarter question. She hadn't answered it, she realized. "No." He nodded. "All right. I'll just sit here for a while." She shrugged. She had no energy for talking. She had no energy for moving or explaining. She wished she had no energy for thinking, but Blake's face across the table 2 hours before played in her head on a loop. She leaned against the wall again and tried to keep her mind blank, but Blake wouldn't stay out. His face popped up in every Blakeless image she tried to conjure, wearing the same sad expression he'd had at dinner. She tried to think of ocean waves. Blake and Seashell Beach appeared. Blue sky, color of Blake's eyes. A flower? She could only see the pink peony that was supposed to have been in her wedding bouquet. Supposed to have been. Past tense. The tears fell faster and she sniffed, the inside of her nose as sore as if it had been sandpapered. Carter cleared his throat and spoke in that same "don't spook the wild animal" voice. "Can I do anything for you? Call your fiance for you?" And that did it. That turned the quiet tears into noisy, ugly sobs and pulled them right out of her. Way scarier than any noise Shoe Man had ever made. "Oh man, I'm sorry. What did I say?" "Blake broke up with me tonight." She heard a long intake of breath and then a quiet curse. She could almost feel him thinking about what to say, but nothing came out of him. Instead, he rested his hand against her back, light and steady, exactly the way her mom would have. After a few minutes, she was able to breathe through her wet-sounding hiccups. "Sorry," she said, once she thought her voice would stay even. It wobbled anyway. "I appreciate that," Carter said. "I've been getting an epic number of dirty looks while I sit here by a sobbing woman. An apology is the least you can do." She didn't smile, but she thought about it. She flashed him her broken fingernail, and he was the one to smile. "I'm going to walk you up to your place now, okay? And then you can tell me who to call to come stay with you for a bit." That finally made her smile. "I'm not a danger to myself, Carter. I just need to crawl into bed, let work know I'm not coming in tomorrow, and sleep for a couple of days." So parts of that sound healthy. The rest of it sounds like you really need to give me a friend's number so I can get them over here." He rose and held his hand out to help her up. Standing so close to him on the top step, she was surprised by how tall he was. Most people were tall to her since she was only 5'3", but Carter had a slight build, at least compared to Blake's gym-sculptured muscles, and she'd thought of Carter as smaller. But he was maybe only an inch or two under 6 feet. 6 feet. 6 feet under. That's where she wished she was at the moment. Not that she would be taking any steps to put herself there. But it sounded quieter and less painful than the here and now. Anger stirred inside her beneath the white noise of hopes collapsing in on themselves. She pushed deeper to find it and cling to it. "The lock's jammed," she said. She wanted to pound the door again. And again and again. Carter's key slid into the lock and turned easily. Of course it did. Why wouldn't it? Why would one single thing go right for her this week when everything had been going wrong since Seashell Beach? She climbed the stairs behind Carter, concentrating on putting her feet in the right place, then plodded down the hall behind him. When they reached her door, he held out his hand. She looked at it, trying to understand its purpose lying there, palm up in the space between them. "Your key?" he said. "Right." She picked the correct one, and he opened the door and followed her in. "I'm serious about calling someone for you. Do you have any friends nearby who would come over?" She pulled her phone from her purse and blinked at it, not even registering the crack she'd put in the screen the day before when she'd tripped over an extension cord at the Duchess. The contact list scrolled past, a blue blur. It stopped and she blinked at it some more. Sherry, Slade, Sophie, Spyglass Jewelry. Spyglass Jewelry. More than sleep or a babysitter or her next breath, she needed her jade piece back. She'd thought it was like missing a limb, but it was more like missing an organ. She mashed the button and relief crossed Carter's face. The voice rang and rang on the other side before a voicemail message informed her that she was calling 2 hours after closing, but that she could try again during normal business hours. "This is Lucy Dalton," she said, and Carter's eyebrows quirked like he was trying to figure out why she'd need to identify herself to any of her good friends by her first and last name. "I dropped a necklace off on Saturday, my jade one. I was just wondering what the repair status was. Please call me back as soon as it's convenient." She left her number and hung up, not caring that it was days too soon for the jeweler to have gotten to it. Carter pointed at the sofa. "Sit." She walked past him because her legs weren't going to hold her up much longer anyway, and he snagged the phone from her hand before she plopped herself down. "I've seen your mom here before, haven't I? Petite blonde, a slightly older version of you?" She nodded. "You guys seem to get along." She nodded, tired now, wanting to leave her head down with each nod. "She's awesome, but don't call her. I'll be fine in the morning, and I'll tell her what's up when I don't sound like a wreck." "You sure? I found her number." "I'm sure. She's going to worry all night when she can't do anything about it. I just want to go to sleep. Can I have my phone back?" He handed it to her. She dialed work to leave a message for the hotel manager that she would be out the next day. At the rate the last few days had gone, he'd probably be relieved anyway. When she hung up, she looked at Carter and blinked, surprised that she wasn't more surprised that he was still there. "Tomorrow or the next day, I'm going to think the me right now is really, really stupid. But the me right now feels as bad as I've ever felt." He took the phone from her and set it on one of the sofa end tables. "Then the you right now needs to go to bed. Go. I'll let myself out." She trudged to her bedroom door. "How are you going to lock it behind you?" "I'm going across the balcony." "Am I going to be able to argue you out of that?" "Nope." "Good night, Spider-Man." He wiggled his fingers to shoo her toward her room. "See you in the morning." She didn't, though. When she stumbled out around noon with her eyes still swollen to slits, it was her mom waiting for her on the sofa. Without a word, she collapsed next to her, and her mom gathered her into a hug so tight she couldn't breathe for a second. It made the world stand still. Lucy curled up beside her and laid her head in her mom's lap, knowing her mom would sit and run her fingers through Lucy's hair, gently picking out snarls and smoothing it better than any conditioner. "Why are you here?" "Your neighbor called me last night from your phone." He explained the situation, and I grabbed the first flight out of LAX. Lucy's eyes flew open. "I'm going to kill him. Don't you have the AP tests coming up? You didn't need to come up." Her mom taught high school history, and the last 6 weeks before the AP tests involved intense review with her kids. "This is more important." She stroked Lucy's hair. "He was on the sofa when I got here this morning. I guess he fell asleep keeping an ear out for you. Nice guy." Prickles of guilt at the thought of Carter squishing himself into a sofa proportioned for her eroded the numbness she'd woken with. She wasn't in the mood to feel, so she snuggled further into her mom. A half-hour passed before her mom patted her back. "You need to eat. I'm going to whip something up." "I'm not hungry." "I don't remember asking." Her mom answered in the tone that had guaranteed every chore of Lucy's childhood got done in the time and manner that her mom decreed. Her mom rummaged around the kitchen, and within minutes the scent of sautéing onions floated out to the sofa, making Lucy's stomach grumble. Maybe she could handle breakfast after all. "Mom, thanks for coming. I'm going back to work tomorrow. You should too. We'll see how you're looking tonight. In the meantime, eat." She set an omelet down in front of Lucy. "I figured we'd better focus on protein because you're going to need some endurance for talking through this breakup." Lucy nodded and ate, cleaning the whole plate. When she was done, she pushed it back and turned to face her mother, who had waited quietly beside her. Lucy opened her mouth and her phone rang. For a second, her stomach lurched. What if it was Blake? What if it wasn't? She snatched it up. Spyglass jewelry. "Hello?" "Hi, this is Stella at Spyglass. I got your message last night. I'm sorry, but it's not done. It really is going to take at least a couple of weeks. I promise I'll call you when I start working on it so you know what to expect, okay?" Her voice was gentle and Lucy swallowed, feeling guilty for hounding her. "Thanks, Stella. I swear I'll be patient from now on. Thanks for calling me back. That was nice of you." Stella assured her that it wasn't a problem. Lucy hung up and dropped her face in her hands. "Nothing's gone right since I broke my necklace, Mom." Silence met that, and she glanced up to catch a look on her mother's face, similar to the one she wore when grading her students' essays, and she wasn't buying their interpretation of historical facts. "Let's start with what happened last night," her mom said. "Blake called me yesterday and said he wanted to go to dinner. He took me to our favorite cafe. I was going on and on about how good the stupid salad was, and then he said, 'We need to talk.' And since nothing good has ever followed that, I wanted to puke up the salad." "Did you?" her mom asked, looking alarmed. "No." "Good. That would have been a waste, especially since the right thing to do would have been to throw any remaining salad at your fiance." "Mom!" "I'm sorry, sweetie. I'm already breaking my own rules. It's hard to be nice when he's hurting you." "You didn't like him?" "We want whatever is going to make you happy. If that was going to be Blake, then we loved him." "But I didn't make him happy. He said that he'd been unhappy for a long time. I told him that it would be a lot better when the wedding was done. A lot of the tension between me and Deborah would go away. But he said," and here she gulped, afraid that the next words would come out on a sob. She took a deep breath and tried again. "He said that he'd been unhappy before the wedding craziness started and that he didn't want to put either of us through any more of it. How could I not know that I was making someone I love unhappy?" "Come here, baby," her mom said, pulling her back into a hug and rubbing her back. "You couldn't make him unhappy if you tried. You couldn't make anyone unhappy. You're not wired for it." She pushed Lucy enough to fix her with a stare that wouldn't let Lucy look away. "What I noticed about Blake right away is that he's deeply unhappy in a way that some people are doomed to be." Lucy couldn't make sense of the words. "I know he wasn't great this weekend, but you saw how he was last summer. Laughing, joking, having a good time with everyone. He's a life of the party kind of guy." "He is," her mom agreed. "And a lot of those guys need that, the constant party where he can shine. Every joke they make, every funny story they tell is about keeping him front and center. I bet he doesn't spend a lot of time alone, does he? No, he didn't. Whether it was going to the gym or buying groceries, he liked her right there with him. I think that's pretty normal for two people who love each other, right? It can be. But you have to add up all the parts to see the whole. Dad likes to do stuff with me because he likes my company, not because he dislikes his own. Then why would he break up with me? Wouldn't it make more sense for him to stay in a relationship? Maybe. Except you have such a strong sense of self. I think that started coming out more and more as you got into the wedding planning. Lucy stiffened. You're saying I railroaded him? No. Oh, sweetheart, absolutely not. I think he realized you weren't going to disappear inside this marriage, but that's a good thing. Lucy rubbed her palms into her eyes. How did I get it so wrong? Well, he's a pretty good-looking guy, her mom said, mischief twinkling in her eyes. You wouldn't be my daughter if you didn't have an appreciation for that kind of thing. Lucy laughed for the first time in hours, even though it hurt her throat. You're awful. Maybe. But this is my advice for any future relationships. If he's pretty, keep him around for a while to look at. Maybe a little longer if he makes you laugh. But if the guy isn't the kind you would let hold your hair back while you're vomiting at 2 a.m. with the flu, cut him loose sooner than later, okay? Lucy's smile faded. I can't even imagine a future relationship. I can't even process that I'm not in one at the moment. Yesterday I was, and now I'm not. Blake's not a bad guy, just an unhappy one. You're definitely going to find a guy who is happy to be with you. Her mom patted her leg and stood, gathering up her dirty dishes and depositing them in her tiny kitchen. I'm going to jump in the shower. Then you're going to take a shower. And while that happens, I want you to think about what's most upsetting to you about this engagement being called off. We'll go for a walk and talk again. Lucy nodded. She couldn't think of anything she wanted to do less, but needed to do more. An hour later, she emerged from her shower feeling about 20% more human, mainly from washing gallons of dried tears off her skin. Lucy decided on Golden Gate Park for their walk because Blake, for some perverse reason, had hated it. She and her mom sat on rocks in the sunshine, and Lucy talked. And she talked. And the longer she talked, the more of her frustrations with Blake flooded out. The way he always decided where they would eat because he had more food moods than she did. The way he told jokes as if he'd practiced them for maximum effort. The way he refused to take sides between her and Deborah, saying they'd have to figure out how to work with each other. Her mom listened through it all without interrupting. When Lucy finally wound down, she sat quietly as her mom scrunched her forehead and thought hard for a minute. I thought the wedding planning was getting to me too, but maybe I just... Her mom waited, and when Lucy didn't finish, she rested her chin on her hands and smiled at her. You never answered the question back at your house. What bothers you the most about the engagement being called off? What doesn't? Lucy asked on a groan. A massive amount of work went into this. I'm going to lose some deposits. My friends are going to pity me, which is never fun. How do you know? Her mom asked. How do I know my friends are going to pity me? No. How do you know how it feels? Have you ever been in a position where people would have a reason to pity you? Of course I have. Everybody has. Name it, her mom said, a small smile playing around her mouth. Name the time when people pitied you. But Lucy was stumped. There had to be something, of course. Right? Who didn't have incidents like that? But she couldn't think of a single example. I'm drawing a blank. Her mom's smile widened. I kind of thought you might. She scooted over until she could put an arm around her daughter and press Lucy's head down to her shoulder. You've had a pretty charmed life. Lucy started to lift her head and object, but her mother held her head in place. That's not to say you haven't worked hard for everything you have, and you deserve every bit of it. Lucy quit straining and leaned into her mom, comforted again. The truth is, though, you haven't had anything really hard happen to you since your grandpa died. And in my heart of hearts, I've always believed when the first big challenge of your life came, you'd rise up and meet it. But there's no way to tell until it happens. She dropped her head against Lucy's, and the vibrations of her next words traveled down through Lucy's skull and shivered her spine. It's here, Lucy. The hardship that's going to test your mettle and show you who you really are. It's here. So the question is, what are you going to do about it? Lucy ran the question through her mind, feeling out the truth of her mom's observation. It felt pretty dang true. Yes, she'd run into obstacles in her job and other things, but she'd never for a single second doubted that things would work out, and they always did. Hard work and luck tended to go like that. But hard work couldn't fix this, and her luck was long gone. So what was she supposed to do? Tears stung her eyes again, and she straightened, refusing to let them fall. What she would not do is sit around feeling sorry for herself. I'm going to wash that man right out of my hair, she said, quoting the song she'd sung when she'd won the lead in her high school production of South Pacific. If relief had a sound, it would have been the musical scale of her mom's laugh. That's what I figured. None of the reasons you listed for regretting this breakup had much to do with Blake and missing him or loving him. This is a good thing, even if it doesn't feel like it. She patted Lucy's thigh, and it was more reassuring than hot coffee on a foggy San Francisco morning. It's not that easy, Mom. I already miss him. I mean, the last few months weren't great, but it's not like I fell for him for no reason. He was pretty amazing when I met him. Funny and good-looking, ambitious, smart. And he's been a big part of my life for the last year and a half. Now he's not going to be in it at all? I can't just snap my fingers and be okay with that ending by bedtime. Of course not. But when you say he was funny, did he make you laugh? Yes. But when it was just the two of you, and he wasn't trotting out one of his perfectly polished jokes, did he make you laugh? Don't answer, she said, holding up a hand. Just think about that for a while. And when you find the answer, ask yourself what you're really missing. Lucy sighed but nodded. Good. Now, the plan. I'm going to get you jump-started. With that, she pulled her cell phone out and made a call. Carter? It's Beth Dalton. We're on. Chapter 5. Her mom wouldn't give up any details on the way home. All Lucy could get out of her was her mom's opinion that Carter was a really nice guy. When they reached the front stoop, he was sitting there waiting for them. He smiled at her like it was a normal run-in and not like he'd slept a whole night on her couch because she was a crazy person. Hi. You probably don't know this about me, but the whole reason I moved here last year was because I was getting away from a bad breakup. So I've got ideas for your plan. I have no plan, she said. What was going on? It felt like being on a moving carousel without anything to hold on to. She was keeping her feet, but barely. Not yet. But your mom says you plan like a boss, so I'm sure one will kick in. I'll just give you something to start with. Her mom squeezed her arm. I know you love a good plan, and Carter's is great. Lucy rubbed her temples. It's okay. I can think of my own. It'll just take me a day or two, and I don't want you sticking around until then. I'm so thankful you came up here, but I want you to go back to work, Mom. You can go home tonight if you want to, because I'm absolutely going to be fine. Here's what I know so far. In a disaster, I'm not a pouter or a whiner. I'm going to be a doer. So I'm going to work tomorrow, and you should too." Her mom smiled. "Love the can-do attitude, daughter. Carter, you ready to take over on Friday?" Lucy shook her head. "That's another thing. Carter, you don't have to babysit me. I can do this." "I'm not babysitting you. You're more like a mentoring project. You're going to train me to be an expert in bad luck?" He grinned. "No, even better. I seriously have the perfect strategy for getting over a gnarly breakup." She rolled her eyes. "You going to write me an app or something?" His expression grew thoughtful. "Now that you mention it, Mom, make him stop." "Sorry, honey, I approve his plan. No one's telling me what it is." Carter smiled. "You'll find out when you get back from work tomorrow. In the meantime, enjoy your day with your mom." He waved and headed up the stairs. Lucy gave up. "Can you at least tell me the plan for the rest of the night?" "Lots of chocolate. Watch Just My Luck for the billionth time, and then more chocolate. Or maybe ice cream. No, both. Make all Carter's plans be about chocolate too," Lucy said, already heading in to dig up her copy of the old Lindsay Lohan movie she'd loved since college. Her real life had no resemblance to anything Lohan, but she'd always seen a ton of parallels between herself and Ashley Albright, the movie's main character who lives a charmed life until all her luck goes bad. She'd just never shared the full experience with Ashley until her jade necklace broke. And if given the choice, that was definitely where she'd have drawn the line at life imitating art. The next day at work was hard, but Lucy survived it with a pasted-on smile and vague excuses about food allergies to explain her slightly puffy eyes. Nothing bad had happened at the Duchess, and given the last few days, she'd count it as a victory. When she got home, she found Carter sitting out on the steps. "I'm going up to bed," she said. He caught her wrist in a grip light enough to break with a tiny tug. "You can't. It's time for my plan. Sit." She sat. "You're absolved, Carter. I hereby emancipate you." "Sorry, you don't have the authority. Only your mom can fire me or otherwise remove me from duty." "She stuck you with a bad job. Why would you even say yes?" "It's at least 6 weeks until the funding comes through for my math app, so I need a fill-in project." He rested a hand on her shoulder and gazed deep into her eyes. "Thank you for saving me from boredom, Lucy." "Knock it off," she said as she pushed his hand aside, but she barely smothered a laugh. "Do I get any details today?" "Yes, today is the first day of the Take Your Mind Off of It rampage." "Do I get a t-shirt for playing?" "No." "Then I don't want to do it." "Sure you do. You get something way better than a t-shirt. Revenge." Lucy's eyebrows went up at that. "Tell me more." "You ever hear that expression that the best revenge is living well? That's what you're going to do. Blake is going to wonder if you even miss him." "Blake," she corrected him. "That's what I said. Blake." That made her grin. "What's step 1? Food. It makes everything better, and that goes double for good food. We're going to the corner market and picking out at least 5 things you've never tried, and we're making them for dinner." "If I haven't tried it, how do I know if it's good food?" "I'm a good cook. We'll make it work." "I'd rather just grab Italian. Then I know I'll like it." Carter nodded, like he was considering that option. "You want to know something about you? You come across as carefree but careful, like you're happy as long as everything is going according to plan." "There's nothing wrong with that," she said, surprised that he'd noticed that about her. "People say I'm lucky, but they don't realize how much of that comes from hard work and careful planning. You get extremely lucky when you live like that. Yeah, like that Edison quote, "The harder I work, the luckier I get." Exactly, smarty pants. I'm not that smart. Statistically, it was going to be Edison, Einstein, Lincoln, or Twain. Try this quote. "The secret to happiness is goofing off in your kitchen with stuff from the corner market and no real plan." Abraham Lincoln? She guessed. Eleanor Roosevelt. Can I trust you to go in and change into something that is not flannel pajamas, or do we need to go straight to the store? She looked down at her wrap dress and heels. Not exactly slumming at the market clothes. I'll change. See you in 15? She nodded and climbed to her feet, unsure how he'd convinced her to go along with his plan. 2 flights of stairs later, she walked into her apartment to hear a Skype alert from her mom. She answered and smiled at the sight of a David McCullough book thick enough to brain a Yeti sitting beside her mom. "Truman again?" she asked, squinting at the spine. "It won't be the last time either," her mom said. "How are you doing?" "Hard day, but I survived. And if I get through tonight with Carter, I'll do it again tomorrow." "That's my girl. What are you doing with Carter?" "Going on some sort of fun-having rampage that will fix all my problems. But I'm overdressed," she said, glancing down at her dress. "I have to change." She signed off with a promise to call if she got too sad and went to her room. She eyed the bed, wishing she could collapse on it and stay there until approximately December, but she didn't figure either her mom or Carter would let her get away with that. She stared at the closet for a minute, trying to figure out exactly what one wore on a rampage. She'd spent a lot of time and money investing in high-quality wardrobe pieces that would translate well, from working with corporate event planners to evenings out with Blake at his cocktail parties. He liked when she played up her femininity, calling her his pocket girlfriend and his doll. Why had she ever thought that was cute? She must have let it slide because he also seemed to have a healthy respect for her intellect. But doll? She shuddered and pulled out something far more casual than Blake would have liked. His idea of dressing down was a collared shirt with a tasteful Tommy Bahama print. Deborah had probably never taught him to even dress himself in the kind of shirt he could pull over his head. Carter always dressed for comfort, and as she slipped into a tank top she normally wore for yoga, a pair of shorts that was the veteran of countless washings, and flip-flops, she decided Carter was onto something, and Blake, with his stupid button-downs, was an idiot. A knock sounded on the front door, and she opened it to Carter. "You ready?" he asked. She took a deep breath. Yeah, she wanted to be done with his self-pity more than Truman had wanted to be done with Stalin. "Let's go shop for our dinner, abomination." Fruits in sizes and colors she'd never imagined filled produce tables in lush pyramids. She picked up something that looked like a spiny lemon crossed with an anemone and sniffed it. "How can this even occur in nature?" she asked, turning it over. "That's a dragon fruit," Carter said, taking it from her hand. "Maybe it didn't occur in nature. Maybe it's actually laid by a dragon." "You're a dork. Hardcore, and I don't deny it. Check this out," he said, setting the dragon fruit down to pick up a squash, a green one with a neck that curved over on itself. It looked like the offspring of a swan and a hand grenade. "What is it?" she asked. "I have no idea," he said. "We're definitely getting it. I guess we can always Google how to cook it. You know, right after we Google what it is. As long as it's a squash, we can work magic on it with enough butter and brown sugar. And if it's not a squash, then I still don't see a problem. Butter and brown sugar. What else do we need to know, really?" The rest of the time in the store went like that. By the time they reached her apartment, they had gone way over the 5 unknown foods goal, but she was far more worried by the partially open front door that greeted her. Carter stepped in front of her and handed her the grocery sacks. "You locked up?" She nodded, her heart pounding. He pushed the door wider and called, "Hello?" Someone answered from inside, which in a weird way made her feel better. A robber wouldn't answer back, would he? Carter stepped in and poked his head back out a minute later to gesture her in too. She walked in to get an eyeful of the building manager's plumber's crack. She squeaked. The manager, John, grunted but didn't look up from where he was prying away drywall near her baseboard. "We had an incident while you were out. Got a call from 2B below you that they had some water leaking from the ceiling." "I've only been gone an hour," Lucy said. "Pipe leak," Carter said. "It's probably been going on for a while." "How do you know that?" Lucy asked. "He hasn't said what's going on yet. Had one last year. Even in a well-maintained building like this, sometimes the old pipes will do their thing." John heaved himself to his feet. "Yeah, looks like this one's been going for a couple days at least. The only reason it's not worse is because the unit above you has been empty for 2 weeks. Lucky for you, they weren't up there running water every day, or your place would be the new 3rd-floor pool." Lucy looked down at the pieces of drywall littering the floor. "Yeah, lucky," she echoed, wondering when that word had come to mean something so different in her life. "I guess if that's the worst of the damage, then you're right." John snorted. "Nah, that's just the start. We've got to tear out the drywall all the way up to the ceiling so they can replace the pipes. Then they'll have to repair it. And I'll have to shut off the water to the unit while they do the repairs, but that won't be before tomorrow. But it could have been worse." He knelt back down and resumed whacking at the wall. Lucy's grip on the grocery sacks loosened, and an ostrich egg nearly paid the price, but Carter snagged it before it hit the floor. "Lucky catch," he said, straightening and lofting the bag to show her it was safe. "Yeah, lucky," she echoed for the second time in minutes. "We're not going to be able to cook in here tonight," he said, flinching when an extra hard whack sent a piece of wall flying. "Better cook at my place." "What are we making again?" They had a scaly green thing, persimmons, red bean paste, and a lettuce she never heard of. Mishmash surprise? "Let's just call it the chef's special." He took the bags back and Lucy followed him next door. "I've never been here before," she said, stepping in to check it out. Blake's place looked like Deborah had copied it straight from a GQ article on contemporary furnishings for the modern man, because she had. Dark leathers, square angles, perfectly on-trend gray walls hung with expertly spaced photographs of vintage cars shot from artsy angles. She didn't figure Carter's place would be anything like that, but neither did she expect to step into his living room and feel like she'd been swallowed up by the world's most comfortable library. She thought she might find his bike hanging on the wall and an IKEA desk full of computers, cables, and papers. But instead, she met 2 walls full of bookshelves. A big corduroy sofa sprawled in the middle of the room. He even had potted plants, herbs it turned out when she wandered over to investigate. "I like your place," she said. A muffled thump sounded from her apartment and she winced. "I can't believe they have to tear my wall out. The streak continues." "You thought that was bad luck?" "Nope, it was good luck. Now you get to repaint it any color you want." "I could have done that before." "Yeah, you could have, but now you can make John do it. See? Good luck. Now let's cook." An hour later, her side hurt from laughing over Carter's beyond stupid narration of their food prep, Iron Chef style. "He rips the guts from the green thing like he's taking its smell personally," That squash is never going to mess with you again. She stared down at its stringy guts spread over the counter. Actually, I'm totally creeped out now. I'm going home. Another loud bang sounded next door. Never mind. Remember, your mom said you have to go along with my plan, Carter said, as if that were totally normal. Carter, I can't believe I have to say this, but it's possible she's trying to set us up. Carter's brow wrinkled. That's too bad. I want your mom to like me, and I already have to disappoint her. Good. I mean, not that I want you to disappoint her. Good that we're on the same page about not dating. I definitely don't want to date you, Lucy Lou, Carter said, a statement that managed to reassure and peeve her at the same time. Why not? Am I suddenly undateable now, too? He rolled his eyes. Do you want me to want you or to not want you? Us dating is a terrible idea. I just like to think at some point when I'm not a mess that I may be considered worth asking on a date again. You're dateable. In fact, I was getting up my nerve to ask you out last fall when you showed up at the mailboxes with an engagement ring on your finger. The tips of his ears turned red. He got busy chopping vegetables, his knife flying so fast it was almost a blur. Lucy had to duck a piece of squash, but Carter didn't notice. He'd wanted to ask her out? She did an accelerated slideshow of the times she remembered interacting with him. She'd never gotten a vibe that he was interested. He'd always been friendly and talkative, but not in a flirty way. She didn't know whether to comment on his admission or move on to something else, and just as she was about to open her mouth to find out what would come out, he spoke again. Did you ever notice how much time I spent out on my balcony? Not really, she said, not sure what answer he hoped to hear. Good, he said. I mean, it seemed like I was always running into you out there, but I thought you were digging the view. I was out there a lot the first year after I moved in, too. Hi, my name is Carter, and I'm an underachieving stalker. I guess if waiting for me to wander out on my balcony was the worst you did, that's not so bad. The tips of his ears were still red. In all honesty, if I wasn't already dating Blake, I'd have probably wandered out on my balcony to see if my cute new neighbor was on his. She bumped him with her hip. He smiled. Dating who? Blake. Who? Blake, she repeated, a little louder. Who? She grinned. Right, no one. Now you're understanding how the rampage to take your mind off it works, Carter said. I need all your attention on the recipe and none on flake. Deal? I live to cook. Good. Let's throw this together and see what happens when we add a little heat. Blake would have made that sound flirtatious, and she wondered how she'd never noticed how rehearsed his lines were before. Blake was an A plus B equals C kind of guy. Flirt this way, girl reacts that way, the result is a hookup or a date or whatever Blake was angling for. He was like that about everything. He approached every situation with an outcome in mind and a plan for achieving it. It had made him excel in business. In a lot of ways, it had made them a good fit. She was a big believer in planning like crazy and getting a predictable result. Predictability got a bad rap, and it shouldn't. It's why she'd been so successful, too. Carter had been rummaging around in his cupboards and turned to face her, holding plates and bowls. Time to eat. She helped him set the table for two, aware that somehow doing this with Carter seemed way more intimate than the dozen times she'd cooked for Blake at her place. Probably because she was hyper-aware of the new surroundings. 15 minutes later, they decimated the food. She groaned. I licked the plate, but I scraped it clean. Carter only gave a sleepy grunt that made her smile. A couple minutes passed before he found the energy to push himself to his feet. My stomach says as far as rampages go, achievement unlocked. Thank you, chef neighbor. You made at least half this dinner. No, I mean for taking my mind off things. I know I've got some rough days ahead, but thanks for helping me through this first part. They say the first 72 hours determine how the rest of your breakup goes. I think the 72-hour thing is for kidnappings. Or solving murders, maybe? But not breakups. You'll need more time than that. We've got rampaging left to do. Rampage sounds so violent. I mean, it makes sense as a guy thing to do, but I think I want to name it something more feminine. Girl words are all too nice for the amount of getting it out of your system that's called for here. I was thinking maybe I should call it the binge and purge. You know, binge on fun things to purge Blake out of my life. Who? She smiled. Right. Wrong. About the name. I'm the expert. Your name idea is disturbing, and we're sticking with the rampage. Moot point. I don't need more rampaging anyway, but thank you. This was so much better than staying in. He gathered up the plates and headed to the kitchen. Don't get up and try to come do dishes. He called over his shoulder as she stood to do exactly that. Also, the rampage can't be over. I figured out great stuff to do when I was out running my issues last year, and you can't be done until you cross them all off your list, too. I can't, she repeated, and the note of warning in her voice stopped him cold. Let me rephrase that. You can do whatever you want. But if you want a tried and true recovery plan, I'd strongly advise you to finish the rampage. She had a plan for emotional recovery she'd been working up between putting out fires at work earlier. It involved soul-searching and listening to soothing music, self-betterment, reading a few classic novels, and vigorous exercise. It made her nearly comatose just thinking about it. What does the rest of the rampage involve? She asked. Tomorrow it's eating at Emmy's Spaghetti Shack, and next Saturday it's going to the Exploratorium. Those sound like things for little kids. What's your point? She laughed. No point. Let's do it. I don't hear any more thumps next door. You're probably safe to go burrow now if you want. That's allowed during the rampage? It's inevitable. And it's kind of good to have the moments of self-pity, so you can contrast them to how much better you feel when you're not burrowing. He walked her to his door. Want to knock on my door when you get home tomorrow? She nodded right as her phone beeped with a text from her mom. Did you hang out with Carter? She held it up for him to see. Notice she didn't ask if I'm okay or how I'm feeling? Just if I hung out with you. I'm not kidding about my mom trying to fix us up. He shrugged, his smile real and easy. I don't do rebounds. So this is me helping out my neighbor while I wait for funding to kick in on my new development project. If you're okay with me using your crappy situation to drag you out of the house and entertain myself, I guess we're even. You know, in the interest of full disclosure. Sounds fair to me. See you tomorrow. Looking forward to it. She slipped out, surprised to realize that she was too. A lot. Chapter 6. Lucy glared at Carter, who was holding his sides and laughing. She poked him, hard. This isn't funny. The light wind got extra playful with her hair, and she pushed the strands out of her face to glare again, but it didn't help. Carter was almost wheezing by that point. He tried to stop long enough to check on her. You didn't hurt anything, did you? My pride. I think I gave a pigeon a heart attack. What have I become now that I'm spending my afternoon terrorizing birds? She redirected her glare to her rented rollerblades. This is your dumbest idea so far. Who even rollerblades anymore? Why did I let you talk me into this?" Carter only laughed harder, and she shoved him. "Sorry," he gasped. "It's just—" And he quit talking so he could do an imitation of her from 3 minutes before, his arms flailing while his feet competed to take him different directions. That's probably what his imitation of a kitten on roller skates would look like, too. She'd never understood how fast breakneck speed really was until she, in fact, felt in danger of breaking her neck. She clenched her fist a couple of times, trying to figure out how much it would hurt her if she punched him for real. But he let out a high-pitched whine that was such a spot-on imitation of her that it broke her. And she collapsed on the grass in giggles. He dropped down beside her. "I didn't sound like that," she said between gasps of air. "You did," he said, his voice strangled with more laughter. "I hate you. You love me. Who else buys you spaghetti meatballs as big as your head?" That was true. On the night Blake had dumped her, she'd been overwhelmed by how her structured life had suddenly become riddled with holes where Blake was supposed to be. She dreaded having to go through that initial stretch of time without him. All the time they used to spend together would be hers to spend alone. Alone. She didn't do alone. And when she'd thought about how long that aloneness might stretch into the future, it had made her ill. Pounding head, churning stomach, the works. But Carter had come around every day that she let him, pulling her to this museum or that gallery or this weird little shop or that hole-in-the-wall restaurant. When she complained that her waistband couldn't survive any more food adventures, he'd decided they should rent rollerblades and sacrifice themselves to the gods of stupidity. She'd still noticed Blake's absence, but in ways she didn't expect. She hadn't realized how much energy she'd spent in managing him and his moods, or how much brain power went into making everything perfect for him. She'd seen it as a challenge, an extension of the work she did at the Duchess, another chance to flex her skill set. Running around and doing things with Carter just because they were there to be done had made her realize how little downtime she'd had from her work mode. Even the socializing she and Blake had done had mostly revolved around him networking, buttering up new clients, or schmoozing for work. Carter shifted beside her, lying back on the grass with his arm over his eyes to shade them. The smile still playing around the corners of his mouth wrung a return smile from her, even though he didn't see it. She stretched out too and stared up at the blanket of blue above her, unbroken by clouds. Carter was all about the hard work of playing. For 3 weeks now, these adventures with him had made everything bearable because she could forget it all. She could forget that work was still going wrong as often as it went right, that her kitchen had only barely been patched up, that 100 things fell apart each day until Carter whisked her off to play. But it was going to catch up to her. At some point, the sheer suckiness of the situation, all the feelings she hadn't worked through about Blake, were waiting to come crashing down. She couldn't outrun them forever, and it didn't seem fair to hang on to Carter and let him drown too. She didn't know when it would happen, but she had a nasty feeling it would be the day she'd highlighted in red on her calendar. June 2nd. Instead of walking down a petal-strewn sandy aisle to get married, she'd be at her desk at the Duchess with a million tasks to do, exactly as if she had never given up 18 months of herself to a relationship that had gone nowhere. Carter stretched his other arm out and nudged the top of her head, a wordless invitation to rest it on him instead of the grass. She hesitated. He was a touchy-feely kind of guy, but this was a step short of cuddling, not his usual teasing pokes and friend hugs. He nudged her again, but it felt as absent-minded as a pat on the head from her grandmother, affectionate but not insistent. So she scooted up enough to accept his arm pillow, You're a good friend, Carter. He didn't say anything to that, but that's what she liked about him. He was comfortable with silence. Blake had used it as a weapon to let her know she'd screwed up somehow, or to get her to knock herself out trying to find out what was wrong with him. She sighed. She didn't miss that. "What are you thinking about?" Carter asked. "Stagnation." "Sounds nice." She smiled even though he was studying the inside of his eyelids and not her. "I just realized I was stagnating professionally." "This epiphany brought to you by rollerblades, and you thought they were stupid." She elbowed him and he laughed. "Anyway, back to my pathetic personal problems. I was saying I was pretty distracted with Blake. I figured I'd push hard at work after the wedding. I mean, I always work hard, but I had big plans for the Duchess once everything with the wedding settled down." "Like what?" She smiled again at the question. The curiosity was a Carter thing. He wanted to know about everything, from how the chef at Emmy's had made the meatballs so big and still got them to cook through, to why inline skates had changed in the last 10 years. On the day they'd gone to the Exploratorium, a hands-on science center, he couldn't get enough of all the interactive exhibits. Within minutes, she'd been playing like a 9-year-old right beside him, giddy over all the gizmos and whirligigs. He nudged her, a reminder that he'd asked her a question. "I want to make the Duchess the premier venue for high-profile events. We get a lot of those already, but I want to push it farther. Tap business that hasn't considered us before by offering the most elegant high-tech setting they could imagine. And then I would be so amazing that the hotel group would beg to promote me to general management at one of their lead holdings. Maybe even at the Duchess." "That sounds like a good plan," he said, his voice full of late afternoon sun, warm and lazy. "Do it." "I wish it were that simple. But you've seen how bad my luck has been when I'm with you. It's actually worse when I'm at work. It's like Murphy's Law on steroids over there. A promotion is definitely not in my future. I'm not sure even a job is in my future if this keeps up." "You'll be okay." His lips grazed her hair in a kiss. She went still, but nothing else happened. She slid a sideways glance at him, but his eyes were still closed. His face still turned to the sun. He wouldn't have kissed a guy friend that way, but he had sisters, so maybe that's what he would have done to cheer one of them up? She hoped. Didn't she? She cleared her throat. "Anyway, I need to get work under control." She tried to pick up the thread of the conversation, but the kiss was still distracting her. What had he meant by it? She should ask. But if he was going to act like it was nothing, then it must be nothing. "You'll do all those things," Carter said. "That's something I figured out about you quick. If you decide you're going to do it, it happens. So work doesn't stand a chance. They should give you the keys to the Duchess now because that's a done deal." "I already have the keys to the Duchess." It had been a fast kiss, like he hadn't been thinking about it, so that was good, right? She wasn't sure. Random kisses, even hair kisses, seemed like a bad idea. "Then they should give you the crown and scepter or whatever it is when you're the boss of the Duchess." "A special RFID badge? What is it?" "It's a crown and scepter, right? Say it's a crown and scepter." "It is, but my boss never wears them because they don't go with his suit." Maybe that hadn't been a kiss. Maybe the wind had ruffled her hair again, and it felt like a kiss. But how did the wind make a kissing sound? She straightened, too fidgety to lie down anymore. "You okay?" Carter asked, cracking an eye open to check on her. "Fine, except for not. I'm really stressed about work. And about you kissing my hair." I think I liked it." "Sorry, what?" Her cheeks heated. She couldn't believe she'd said that last part out loud. She'd meant she'd liked him kissing her hair, and that was the problem. Focus, girl. "Nothing, just saying I'm glad I like my work." Work. She'd let Blake dominate her work-life balance, and it hadn't balanced at all. The wedding had gotten her attention, and the Duchess got what was left. She had to flip that, at least until her job was under control. When she put all the pieces in place, luck had a way of happening. When she got distracted, let things get too spontaneous, everything went sideways. It rained bad luck. She caught herself reaching for her necklace again. "You think I should call Spyglass again?" "You called her 2 days ago, right?" "I think she'll let you know when it's done." That would have sounded so condescending coming from Blake, everything underscored with an unspoken but obvious duh. But Carter's tone was reassuring, and it made her want to burrow into him and soak up more of his mellowness. Hold up. Bad idea. As much as the last 3 weeks with Carter had been fun, she didn't need the double awkwardness of getting caught up in some emotional rebound with a neighbor she couldn't avoid when her feelings for him inevitably flamed out, plus having her career fall apart due to lack of focus. Carter was a cute guy. A really cute guy, actually. And if she quit distracting him, she'd leave him free for someone else to swoop in and snatch him up. In fact, her friend Allie had hinted more than once that Carter seemed pretty dateable. Maybe she should hook them up. She pictured them together and wrinkled her nose. She couldn't say why exactly, but something about it was off. It was the same sense of something being not quite right when she was eating chicken at a nice restaurant and it had been grilled too close to where they'd cooked seafood. Blake had always said she was imagining the fishy flavor, but she always asked the server, and she'd never been wrong yet. The picture of Allie and Carter in her mind had the same tinge of not quite rightness. Wait, did she think that because she wanted it to be herself in the picture with Carter? She gave that mental image a whirl. It looked totally normal in her head, and she frowned. "You must have some deep thoughts going on in there," Carter said, startling her with the feather-light touch of his finger grazing the furrows between her eyebrows. Her eyes flew open to find him propped on his elbow and smiling down at her. His finger moved down to trace the frown tugging down her mouth. A devilish impulse to catch the tip of his wandering digit between her teeth and see what he did parted her lips. But before she could see what would happen, her phone shrilled and she shot up. "Hello?" she said, aware of Carter's gaze on her profile. "Hi, this is Jolie at Eveline's Bridal. Your dress is here and we're ready to schedule you for a fitting." Lucy's chest tightened. "I canceled that order a couple of weeks ago. I canceled my whole wedding." Keeping her voice steady as she said it felt like walking a high wire without falling. She listened to the clerk's flustered apology on the other end that sounded as if it were coming from way below her perch on the high wire. Yes, she understood that she would still owe the cost of the special ordered dress, but they could attempt to sell it on consignment for her if she would like to do that. Yes, she would like to do that. No, there was no way she would be wearing that dress. No, Jolie didn't need to apologize for the call. She hung up and scrounged up a smile for Carter. "I guess whoever called me last time didn't leave a note that I'd cancel the order. You still have to pay for it?" She nodded. "Yeah, they might be able to sell it to someone looking for a deal." He rested his hand on her back. "I'm sorry. Maybe we should ramp up the rampage?" She straightened away from his hand and climbed to her feet, fighting hard to keep her balance, emotionally and otherwise. Carter, and whatever he heard in her voice shadowed his face as he climbed to his feet too. She continued anyway. "You got me through the worst of it." The rampage was a success, and now I need to focus on work. You made it possible for me to hold on to the status quo, but I really need to push ahead. I'm getting to the point where all this spontaneity is starting to go from being helpful to getting me off track. Not that it hasn't been amazing," she rushed to add when a flicker of hurt flashed in his eyes. "But the healthy thing for me to do is to take control of my life again. Besides, think of all the free time you're going to have now that you don't have to babysit me," she said, hoping to tease a smile out of him. It worked. "You mean babe-sitting?" he asked, wiggling his eyebrows at her, dirty old man style. He ducked when she swung at him, and he caught her fist, using her momentum to spin her around and pull her up against him. He braced his feet on either side of her skates and steadied her. "Careful there, Muhammad Ali. You steady?" She nodded, surprised by how hard his chest felt against her back. He released her slowly, keeping hold of her hand until he was sure she'd found her feet. She was even more surprised by how much she missed his warmth against her. "Let's go," he said, turning on his skates as easily as if they were his regular Adidas. "Let's return these before I deposit you back in the Lucy cave." She clunked after him, relieved that he hadn't put up a fight. Right? For the millionth time, she reached up to rub her jade and flinched when she found empty space. Carter's gentle urging aside, it was time to call Spyglass again and see when it would be done. She needed all the help she could get to put her life back on track. Playtime was done. Chapter 7. First thing at work the next morning, Lucy went through her wedding to-do list one more time to make sure everything was actually canceled. The call about the dress had been a lot like finding a fly in her morning juice, and she could do without those kind of karmic ripples on a regular basis. It looked good until she got to the dates for the Mariposa Hotel. She'd canceled the reservation weeks ago, but she hadn't been able to bring herself to take the vacation request off the Duchess calendar. She hated the symbolism of it. What should have been a week of celebrating with friends and enjoying her new husband would officially become another week in the office. She closed the to-do list. Soon. She would delete the time-off request soon. Just not today. Today was about pulling work out of a downward skid. It was about working smart and seeing problems before they could arise. It was about working so hard that it compensated for her missing luck. It was about making it happen. And with the final deep breath, she dove right in to fill some of the gaps that had opened on the Duchess event schedule. That night, and every night for the next 2 weeks, she fell into bed like she'd been wrung out of energy and dropped there to dry. Some nights she dragged herself out to the balcony to see if Carter was around. She only saw him twice. Based on their conversations, he was winning life. She rattled off a long list of new events they'd booked, new hires she'd made, new problems she'd solved. He described some ridiculous thing he did that day that sounded more fun than anything she'd done all year. Minus the weeks of the rampage with him. She refused to let it distract her. The progress at work had been clear and steady, but setbacks kept cropping up. A flower vendor who had decided on an unreasonable rate hike, or an event liaison who was more interested in booking personal dates with tech guys than booking events for the hotel. At the end of her first week of Operation Break the Slump, it had all come pouring out during her nightly call to her mom. "I don't get it," she complained, hating that she sounded like one of her mom's honors students whining about a B. "I'm giving this my full time and attention, and I'm running into problems like I never have before. When is this stupid bad luck streak going to snap? Because I will if it doesn't soon. I'm going to lose my mind." Her mom had sighed. "You're still convinced this is all going to be better when you get your necklace back, "I know it will." Sweetie, you're having the same luck you always had. It's just that before you always expected things to work out, and they did. Now you're expecting things to go wrong, and they do. The truth is, nothing's changed. You have the same amount of things going right as you do wrong, but your perception is different because of your expectations. But Carter's luck has definitely improved. It's not my imagination. Everything used to go wrong for him, and now it all goes right. Ask Carter about his luck sometime. See if he agrees with your assessment. She'd had to wander out onto her balcony 4 nights in a row before she'd had the chance. What had happened to the days when he'd hang out here waiting for a glimpse of her? It would have been a lot more convenient if he'd kept that up. She was smiling at the inner 3-year-old that seemed to be controlling all her emotions when Carter's door slid open, and he settled into the deck chair on his side. "It's good to see you smiling," he said. "Let me in on the joke?" She shook her head. "I was just being lame." "Not possible." "I have a random question for you. Do you feel like you're having a run of good luck right now?" He shrugged. "No more than usual." "But didn't you feel like you were having a ton of bad luck last year?" "Nah, I was having a lot of bad days, and now I don't. But that's what happens after a tough breakup. It's hard to see anything as going your way for a while. Doesn't mean the rest of the stuff in your life is better or worse, but when the biggest thing in it becomes a total wreck, sometimes it's hard to realize that the rest of it is the same as it always was." She straightened and fixed him with the unwavering stare her mom had always used to pry secrets out of her when she was a kid. "Has my mom been coaching you on the phone?" That startled a quick headshake out of him. "What are you talking about? I haven't seen her since she left after, you know." She eased back into her chair. "You can say breakup. I'm not fragile." "Okay, so what made you ask if I talked to your mom? I promised to tell you if she's trying to check up on you." "Don't worry about it. It wouldn't bother me if she did." He stood and walked over to lean on his rail. If she did the same thing, they'd be face to face, almost lip to lip. Her cheeks heated. Stupid. This is what came of not having a fiance around to kiss regularly. She cleared her throat and stood up. "I'm sure she won't call you. Have a good night, Carter," she said, slipping through the door. She closed it on his soft, "Wait, Lucy Lou," because she didn't need to stay outside any longer and wonder how soft his hair felt, or if his biceps were as hard as his chest had been. She climbed into bed and fired up her laptop, determined to get a jump on the next day. Her mom was right. If she expected glitches to happen, they wouldn't surprise her. And if she expected them to work out, they would. Now she just had to figure out all the possible glitches, and since she couldn't think about them and Carter's hair, she pushed Carter out of her head. The new approach helped the second week. Every time something went wrong, she tried to think of it as a problem that would solve itself. No biggie. And even though sometimes those problems did in fact turn into biggies, or none of them solved themselves, they did get solved, eventually. After she finally managed to replace the conference that had canceled for September with a different event that grossed almost as much on the food and beverage service, the general manager stopped by her office to compliment her. By the third week, she'd hit a groove. Her job didn't have the same feel of lighthearted fun like it had before her necklace had broken, but she was starting to crave the feeling she got when she finally worked through a particularly knotty problem. It was like a huge post-workout stretch, but inside her brain. None of it helped in the fourth week. June 2nd stared back at her from her work calendar in red, highlighted as urgent. It wasn't like she was going to forget when that should have happened, but she had forgotten to delete her time off request. She went into the scheduling function and deleted Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. But the closer she got to Friday, her chest tightened. That was supposed to be the day where everything in her life changed for the better, when she took a permanent step into her new life. It deserved more mourning than a deletion from her calendar. Instead of erasing it, she scooped up her cell phone and texted Allie, formerly her maid of honor. Going to head down to Seashell Beach next Thursday and Friday to do something either symbolic or crazy. Probably both. You in? The answer came back in seconds. Totally. Seashell Beach back on my calendar. Lucy didn't need a 10-day block off from work anymore, but those 2 days would be spent reconciling her new path with where it had split with the old one, and proving to herself that she was truly okay. Chapter 8. Her alarm was set early for Thursday so she and Allie could beat the worst of the traffic before hopping on the coast highway to cruise down to Seashell Beach. But her phone rang even earlier than that. "Hello?" she mumbled while squinting at the time display. "Lucy, bad news," she heard Allie say at a tinny distance until she fumbled the phone back up to her ear. "What's going on?" She sat up and blinked sleep from her eyes. "Food poisoning, I think. I feel like I'm going to die. There's no way I can make the drive this morning. I'm so sorry." Lucy sighed. Allie sounded like death had reanimated her, to use her voice box. "Don't worry about it. Hydrate and sleep." "But I feel so bad." "Don't. Maybe my mom can drive up and meet me. Or maybe I need to go down there and do this alone, so I can prove I'm strong enough. But whatever I do, you need to go back to sleep." She cut off another croak and ordered Allie back to sleep for the 3rd time before hanging up. She lay there for an hour, long enough for the sun to brighten her room, debating what to do. Her mom could drive up after school and get there by dinner, but she didn't want the weight of her mom's worry on her. She could do this alone. She'd use the time to reflect, to come back from the weekend that should have been her wedding recentered and refocused. She got up and changed into the cute sundress she'd pulled out the night before, trying not to think about how taking Allie's convertible would have been way more fun. She'd just keep her windows down and her radio loud, and it would be fine. An hour later, she'd polished off a grapefruit and some yogurt and had her bag in the car when her phone rang again. This time, it was Stella at Spyglass. "Lucy, I know your necklace took longer than you would have liked, but I promised it would be worth it, and it is. It looks as good as new. I can send it out to you today if you like." Lucy leaned against her car. It was done? And today of all days. It felt eerily full circle. "I'm heading down that way. I'll come in and pick it up." She ended the call and plopped down behind the wheel where she slumped and rested her head on her hands. It was the weakness of relief mixed with an emotion she didn't expect. 6 weeks ago, she'd been down in Seashell Beach without the faintest idea that everything was about to fall apart. And while she grew more sure each day that it had exploded only for her to rebuild something better, the reality of how hard this weekend might end up being for her sunk in. Anger roiled in her stomach and chest as she thought about the box she'd forced herself into to fit with Blake. It was anger at him, but anger at herself too. Prickles traveled up her chest and lodged on the inside of her eyelids, threatening tears. She sniffed and started the car, then pulled the key from the ignition again. She needed to go, to prove she was strong enough, but she wasn't at all sure she was strong enough by herself. So she called the person she knew could make her stronger. "Carter? Are you busy for the next 2 days?" Chapter 9. Her mom checked in at lunchtime. "You doing okay? Is it strange being there?" Lucy glanced up at the redwood towering over her. She couldn't even see its leaves. Didn't actually get there yet." Traffic, her mom said, sympathetic in the way only an Angelino can be. No, actually, Allie got sick, so I invited Carter along for the ride, but he keeps tricking me into detours. We're in a redwood forest right now, and I guess when we're done here... She pulled the phone down and called over to Carter, who was sniffing ferns. What are we doing next? The Giant Dipper. We're riding a roller coaster in Santa Cruz, she reported to her mom. Carter's with you? Her mom said, sounding way too delighted. Yep, he reported for friend duty this morning. But he's turning this 4-hour drive into about twice that, so I don't know how much help he's being, Lucy said with a laugh when he turned to roll his eyes at her. I won't bother you anymore. Call me when you get there. Her mom hung up before Lucy could finish saying goodbye. What's after the roller coaster? She used her annoyed tone of voice, but the truth was, these ridiculous detours were the exact reason she'd called Carter. Work had straightened itself out beautifully, but she couldn't remember feeling so bored. Having the wedding to look forward to had taken up a lot of her non-work time. And then Carter had stepped in to soak up that time when Blake dumped her. But once she'd scaled back time with Carter, she'd begun to realize she had phased out an awful lot of non-Blake interests in her life when he came along, leaving her trying to remember what she had used to do for fun before him. Carter shrugged. I don't know. I'll figure it out when we're done with the roller coaster. Uh-huh. Do you figure on us actually getting to the hotel at any point? Dinnerish. And when are we done with the redwoods? When enough people get here to calculate how many of us it would take to hold hands and wrap around that tree. He pointed at the hugest tree they'd seen so far, about 100 yards off. We're literally going to be tree huggers? What if it takes forever for enough people to get here? That's a huge tree. Then it takes forever. He studied her face like it was the GPS display of her car. You're getting twitchy. Look, you're doing me a favor if you do this. I can turn this into a word problem that's going to be great in my app. She narrowed her eyes. You just made that up. Yes, but it was true the moment I said it. I need to stay until we can do this big group hug. It took an hour and a half before he pulled it off. A busload of little old English ladies thought it was a delightfully daffy thing to do and helped them out. When Lucy and Carter climbed back into the car, he wore a satisfied smile. The answer had been 17 senior citizens plus the two of them. I can turn this into so many problems with variables. What if it was all adults or all kids? They'll have to find average arm spans by age and extrapolate. This is awesome. Lucy shook her head and got them back to Highway 1. In Santa Cruz, Carter tried to chicken out of the roller coaster, but Lucy shamed him into riding it with his hands up the whole time. He insisted they stop in Monterey to visit the aquarium and narrated the action in the tanks as if they were eavesdropping on high school girls. He wanted to stop at Hearst Castle in San Simeon, but Lucy pleaded exhaustion. He did convince her to pull over and gawk at a beach covered in seals. That's the cutest thing I've ever seen, she said, watching a baby nestle with its mother for a while. Makes me miss my mom. He grinned at her. Yeah, I can kind of see that. She's pretty protective of you. She hasn't been bothering you, has she? Lucy closed her eyes and turned her face up to catch the rays of the setting sun. Not bothering me, no. Something about the way he inflected the word bothering snapped her eyes open. Wait, she still calls you? Yeah. Just to make sure you're telling the truth about how things are going, I guess. She straightened and turned to face him, her knees caught up to her chest. And am I? I always tell her I don't really know. I haven't seen you much the last couple of weeks. Well, if she's checking to see if I'm adapting to life just fine after my breakup, the answer is yes. I'm telling the truth. Good. He flicked a glance at her. Does it bother you that she still calls me? No. It surprised her. Her mom had never called Blake, but Lucy didn't tell Carter that. If it made her mom stress less to get an independent report and Carter didn't mind the calls, Lucy was okay with it. He cleared his throat. So, really? You're happy as is? She glanced over at him. He stared out at the horizon, like he was studying it for the secret of life, but it was empty. Sure, I'm happy. Happy like this is what you want for the rest of your life to be like happy? No, she said, drawing the word out like it had acquired 10 extra vowels. But it doesn't have to be that right now. I'm in transition. It'll take time to get back to that kind of happiness. So you've had it before? Yeah. She frowned. No. I guess I've been happy in moments, but not ones where I want the rest of my life to be that and only that. Have you? He held her gaze for several heartbeats before he looked back out at the horizon. I've had moments I wanted to freeze forever. But I think maybe being really happy is when you get to the end of a day and you never want it to end, but you also can't wait for it to be over because then you're that much closer to the next day, and you know it's going to be even better because that's how your days are going. Each one is even better than the last. She thought about how that would feel. Had that been what it was like for him with his ex before they fell apart? A sad pang echoed through her before she blinked and shoved one of his arms hard enough to knock him flat on the sand. He sat up, laughing. What was that for? I'm supposed to be on a road trip. We're late getting to the hotel. What kind of Sherpa are you? Sherpas are in the Himalayas. Then what am I supposed to call you? My cabana boy? My bellhop? He rose to his feet and held out a hand to pull her up, his easy smile in place. You can call me your friend. Come on, Lucy Lou. Let's get you down to Sad Town. He turned back toward the scenic overlook they'd hiked down from and kept her hand in his as he towed her along the sand. I don't think it's Sad Town, she said. It's more like what might have been town, and put things to rest town. Carter said nothing, but squeezed her hand. She decided not to tell him that the rocks on the beach weren't big enough for her to need his help navigating them, and left her hand where it was. She thought about his definition of happiness. When had she last felt like that? 3 hours before, she realized. It was when they'd left the sequoias and she'd realized that Carter had no intention of taking a straight line anywhere. She'd been torn between wanting to stay and soak up the quiet of the forest forever and wanting to see where Carter would drag her next. He always seemed on the edge of possibility, throwing himself into whatever project ignited his passion. She could do that, if she could find it. She liked event planning. She was good at it. But it didn't light her up inside the way her mom did when her students' AP scores came in, or the way Carter did when he explained some new modification for his math app. So tomorrow, the search would begin to find it. That thing that would make her light up inside, too. And not the content glow she'd felt when Blake came along at the right time to fit her marriage timeline either. She wanted the fire that sent her mom into her rough high school every single day with the determination to make a difference to those kids. That kept Carter's light shining through his balcony window at 2 a.m. when she stumbled to her fridge for a drink. She'd asked him once what he was up to. Ideas, he'd said, the same way she might have confessed to a middle-of-the-night chocolate binge, with total happiness. She drove the last hour into Seashell Beach. Carter watched the coast roll by out of his window, shooting her a smile and pointing now and then when something caught his eye. But he didn't talk much. She was thankful for the quiet. Her thoughts tumbled and slid like the seals on the beach had, bouncing off of each other and scuttling in a new direction. When she turned into the stone-paved driveway leading to the Mariposa's entrance, she frowned. Last time she'd pulled up beneath the portico, her stomach had already been in knots over Blake, wondering what his mood would be like. Which version of her fiance would show up to meet her? How had she not seen it then? Carter's hand brushed hers, and she looked up to read a question in his eyes. "I'm fine," she said, looking past him to the hotel entrance. Blake's mother would be pitching a huge hissy if she knew I was staying here with another guy on the night before my wedding. Carter's eyes widened and Lucy burst into laughter even as her cheeks heated. Wow, that couldn't have come out more wrong. We're in the honeymoon suite, but you'll have a whole fold-out sofa all to yourself. A look she couldn't decipher flickered over his face before he grinned back at her. Good. I know how hard it's been for you to resist me. I need a buffer for my own safety. Huh, she said, putting the car in park and separating the key from the ring for the valet. Seriously, are you okay with staying on the sofa? I was planning on having my girlfriend Allie with me, and she thought it would be more of a full circle moment if we stayed in the honeymoon suite. I'm sure it's a comfy fold-out couch in a swanky place like this. Oh, I've done time on a sofa during your emotional trauma before. I'm sure I'll be fine, he said, a small smile still in place. Right. You know how people say, I owe you one? I think I owe you more like 1,000,000. This time, his hand covered hers on the gear shift and stayed there. She liked the sugar scrub friction of his calluses against her knuckles. She stared at their hands layered together and wondered where his calluses came from. The handlebars of his bike? His gaze followed hers down, and he withdrew his hand. Cool air flowed over her skin where his touch disappeared. He turned to open his door. You ready for this? So ready, she said. Getting past the day felt like the final step toward being done with Blake. He'd be the picture in the back of her head when she eventually dated again, but only so she could ask herself if what she felt for someone was real or just convenient. It wouldn't be about how easy it was to be with them socially, or because of similar life plans. It would be about how easy it was to be with them sitting on a sofa in their sweats and being quiet and happy. The desk clerk smiled at her when she pulled up the honeymoon suite reservation. Congratulations, Miss Dalton. Hope tomorrow is wonderful. Oh, it'll be something, all right. The clerk's smile wavered, and remorse needled Lucy. She gave her a smile and took her key without another word, afraid only snark would come out. Up in the room, Carter gave a low whistle as he took in the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sheer drapes fluttered in the ocean breeze blowing in over the balcony. Wow. Yeah. She didn't have anything to add. Wow covered it. So, what's the plan now? Allie had planned this part of the trip. Knowing her, it probably would have involved ceremonial deletions of Blake's pictures from all Lucy's social networks, a little bit of rum, and a lot of nonsense. But all of that felt weird to do with Carter, so she shrugged and wandered out to the balcony. The moon painted a silver path across the waves to where they met the sand a few hundred yards from her perch. What time is it? She asked when she heard Carter step out behind her. Almost 9. It's been a pretty full day. I think I'm ready for room service and then bed. I'll find a menu. Wait, she said, and Carter paused in the doorway. Is that okay with you? Blake didn't like staying in often. He was more about the scene and being seen in it. I'm up for whatever, Lucy. This is your weekend. Then I want to sleep, she said. Right after she spent a long evening taking the inside of her brain apart and making sure that she'd gotten the rewiring right. She needed to be cloistered, nun-like, away from Carter and his distracting hair for that. She'd short-circuited a couple of times around him lately, and she didn't have the time on this mini-retreat to figure out why when there were so many other things to sort through. Do you care if I order for us? Carter asked, poking his head back out. More adventure? She asked with a grin. You know me so well. Go ahead. And just so you know, I'm planning adventurous stuff for tomorrow. It won't be all working on our tans. Oh, good, he said. Watching people lay around in swimsuits is low on the list of how I like to pass the time. Although I'm sure you look awesome in a swimsuit, and it would be totally worth it. It was a line on par with some of the worst she'd heard out at bars, and as if he sensed her surprise, he colored. I'm trying to say that I didn't mean I thought laying out would be boring because you would look bad in a swimsuit. I wasn't trying to sound like a subclass Guido. Her filter shut off and let the next words out of her mouth. I rock a bikini. Believe it. He swallowed. I definitely do. I'm going to go order some chicken breast. He squeezed his eyes shut on the word breast. Anyway, it looks really good. It's stuffed with some herb paste I've never heard of, and it sounds good. And I'm getting nachos because they sound good too. And I'm going to just do that now. He disappeared. Something about walking into a hotel room with him had made her feel like an awkward 15-year-old, and she understood his blush. It'd be a relief to get a good night's sleep and reset. This day was playing more havoc with her brain than she'd expected it to. She soaked in the moonlight for a while longer until she was sure it had unwound her, then slipped back into the suite. Carter was bent over his laptop, the screen full of code. Working on your app? Yeah. Funding is in, so I hired a couple of other developers. I'm just gathering the requirements so I can call a design meeting next week. Cool. She shifted from foot to foot. Turned out she was still wound up, so she opted to escape. I'm going to go sit and think for a while. Let me know when the food gets here? He nodded, his brow pinched into wrinkles, but he didn't stop her. 45 minutes later, she heard the muffled sounds of Carter talking to the room service guy. She joined him on the still-folded couch for a more normal dinner. They'd done this many times, eaten something new and laughed together. But at 10:30, a yawn got away from her even after she clapped her hand over her mouth, and he stood and pulled her to her feet. That's it, lightweight. You're done. Go to bed, he said, leading her to the bedroom and nudging her through the door before he stepped back and tried to pull the door closed. She held it for a moment. I'm not a lightweight. It's been a full day. That's all. Yes, and there are different kinds of tired. Go sleep off today. You're probably going to need even more energy tomorrow. He smiled as he pulled the door all the way shut behind him. She changed into her pajamas and climbed into the bed, staring up at the ceiling instead of the inside of her eyelids like he'd ordered her to. This weekend was supposed to be about putting Blake neatly into his place in her life. A mental file box like the ones she kept at her parents' house, full of high school pictures and mementos, certificates, dried corsages, tokens that proved it had happened, but nothing she needed to keep with her and explore regularly. And Blake was cooperating, staying where she tucked him. But Carter? Carter wasn't cooperating at all. And she sensed a long night ahead of her, trying to figure out where he was supposed to fit, because the benign neighbor file wasn't it. Chapter 10. Lucy woke up the next morning and took a deep breath. It had taken her until well past midnight, but she'd decided what to do next. She'd take all the time she needed to sit with the idea and see if it held up to the bright light of day. And if it did, well, the rest of this road trip was going to end up far more interesting than she would have guessed. She crept out of her room in case Carter was still sleeping. He lay on his stomach, his hair poking out over the blanket. She wanted to touch it to see if it felt soft or bristly against her skin. She rubbed her palm against her pajama pants and padded over to the sofa, trying to decide how to wake him. He looked so comfy, his eyelashes lying long and dark against his blanket-creased cheek. She climbed on the bed and sat next to him. He mumbled something but didn't wake up. She reached toward his hair. She couldn't help herself, but she pulled back short of touching it. What would he think if he woke up to find her in his bed, in her pajamas, fondling his hair? And what did she want him to think? She edged back toward the floor, just setting her foot down as he rolled over to blanket her. "Hey, what are you doing?" he asked, the same way Allie had sounded when Lucy had given her a ride home after she got her wisdom teeth out. "Nothing. Came in to wake you up, but then I felt bad. I'm going to change and go for a run. Take your time. Sleep more if you need to." He pushed himself up on one elbow. He'd slept without a shirt, and his chest looked as muscled as it had felt when they'd been rollerblading. "No, I'm good. What's the plan for today?" She narrowed her eyes at him. "Are you asking so you can change it on me, or are you really going to do what I planned?" He smiled and lifted one shoulder. "Depends on if I think it'll make you happy." She didn't know what to make of that. "I thought we'd rent bikes and ride down to Pismo Beach, poke around there to see what's interesting. You want to add any bells and whistles to that?" "Yeah, breakfast and a shower, but I can do that while you run." "Sounds good," she said, scurrying into the bedroom. 5 minutes later, she was out again, dressed to run. Carter was sitting on the side of his sofa bed looking like he hadn't connected all the way to reality yet, but he'd put on a Microsoft t-shirt. Lucy didn't know if that was a good thing or not, but she thought probably not. It seemed wrong to cover up that chest. "See you in an hour," she said. Within minutes, she was pounding down the boardwalk, but all the strange, jittery energy she'd felt around him had followed her out to fuel her run. Fine, then. She ran harder, trying to focus on the rhythm of her feet and her breathing. Thoughts of Carter intruded anyway. She had a whole reel of Carter highlights she hadn't known about, and it played on a loop. Carter laughing as he diced vegetables like he'd been born doing it. Carter's eyes twinkling at her as he pulled her to her unsteady rollerbladed feet. Carter's forehead furrowed with worry when he thought she wasn't looking. Carter's gaze level and cool as he challenged her to the rampage. Carter's easy way with her mom. She glanced out at the water. 3 hours from now, and she would have been stepping onto the sand to walk toward Blake and a minister. She'd expected him to be on her mind so much more today, but all she could feel was a sense of relief. Like when she was 9 and she'd knocked over her grandmother's prized vase, but caught it right before it hit the floor. It was the bone-deep thankfulness of narrowly avoiding a disaster. All the space she thought Blake would take was going to Carter. And the more time she spent with him, the more room he took up in her head. She ran harder, racing toward a conclusion that she'd fallen asleep considering. She'd been ready for a relationship when Blake came along. She'd mistaken him for Mr. Right because he showed up at a convenient time. But she was still ready for a relationship. Now the timing didn't seem great, but the guy did. She wanted Carter. She slowed to a stop and pulled her phone out of her sports armband to make a call. "Hi, honey. Hanging in there?" She smiled at the worry in her mom's tone. She loved being loved. Yes and no. I might be losing my mind, but not for the reasons you think. Okay, her mom said, drawing the word out as a question. I want to talk to you about Carter. Ah. Her mom sounded about as surprised as if she'd announced that oceans still had waves. He's my friend, but I think I want to upgrade. To a new friend? To benefits. No, to a relationship. She could hear the smile in her mom's answer. I vote yes. But Carter won't. He's been pretty clear that he will not be the guy to step in and catch me on rebound. Are you rebounding? No. Then there's no problem. Yes, there is. He's never going to believe that, especially not if I bring it up here. Something about her mom's calm reaction nagged at her. Wait, aren't you surprised? I thought you'd ask me if I was sure about this. Sweetie, I saw this coming from the first day I was up there. I think that neighbor of yours might be crazy about you. The possibility made her heart pound hard enough to drown out the crash of the waves in front of her. I don't know, Mom. He's always ready to help me out if he thinks I need it, but I don't want him to see me as some project. And even if you're right, I don't think the day and crime scene of my canceled wedding is the time or place to convince him that I'm not rebounding. I'm sure you've got a plan, her mom said. Time. It would take a lot of time, actually, but she'd convince Carter that Blake was a misguided idea she'd had that was as much in the past as her untouched box of high school mementos in her parents' garage. Only Blake wasn't something she was interested in holding on to. I'll play it cool, be his friend for a while, slowly add in some flirting until he can't miss the signals, and then I'll graduate out of the friend zone. Why not just say something to him? Ask him where his head is at. Because I really want this to work out, and right now I'm standing about 3 miles down the road from where I was going to get married at noon. He's not going to trust anything I say while we're here. She'd love to go back to the hotel, grab him, and kiss him as a wordless announcement of where she wanted them to go. But for now, no matter how many new discoveries she made about Carter's hotness and his fascinating mind, no matter how often he made her laugh until her stomach hurt, she'd be his friend until he understood that she was already over Blake. I think you should just talk, but I guess it never hurts to take things slow. But make sure you don't move so slowly that he can't even detect the forward motion, okay? I like that boy for you. Don't worry, Mom. I like him for me, too. I'm going to play this right. They hung up, and a half hour later, she was back at the Mariposa. It was a letdown to find the room empty, but she knew Carter had to be around somewhere. She stepped into the bathroom to shower. Steam and the smell of soap lingered from the shower Carter had already taken. It was an odd sort of intimacy that took her straight back to 8th grade, when Aaron Wellberg had gotten up from a lunch table to go shoot hoops with his friends, and she'd slipped into his spot while it was warm just so she could feel the traces of his body heat on the bench. She walked out of the room 30 minutes later in cute shorts and a tank top, a touch of lip gloss and her favorite hoop earrings. But she hadn't done more than blow-dry her hair, because Carter had said once that he liked how it looked when she let it go natural instead of straightened. The almost curl in it seemed somehow more right here by the beach anyway. So, bikes? Carter asked, looking up from his laptop to smile at her. His hair looked like he'd tried and failed to tame it, strands of it already trying to reclaim their cowlick status. We're going about 20 miles. Think you can handle it? He rolled his eyes. Yeah, Lance Armstrong. Maybe you better hit up your secret sauce so you can keep up. She grinned. It's not a race. It's one of those days where I want to enjoy every minute because it was so close to being such an epically wrong turn. I want to savor every second of being back on track." His eyebrow rose. "That sounds, much better than I thought you would." "I'm taking my life back. No big deal." He grinned back at her. "Yeah, no big deal." "I want to swing by the jeweler and pick up my necklace first. Seems like a good way to kick all this off." Worry crossed his face. "Is it a big deal if we don't go by until this afternoon?" He nudged a backpack that Lucy hadn't noticed. "I went and picked up some lunch for us. It's not going to keep forever, but I thought it would be fine if we got on the bikes right away." Lucy shrugged. "Yeah, we can do it after the bike ride. She told me once that afternoons are less crazy for her anyway." "What did you get for lunch?" "It's a surprise." "Isn't everything with you?" "Yes. Bring me to the bikes, woman." On the way out of the hotel, she narrated the sights of canceled wedding activities in the serious tones of a news anchor describing an accident scene. And there is where Lucy Dalton almost held her rehearsal dinner. It was a narrowly averted disaster since Dave Dalton would most likely have punched Calvin Sefton hard. Carter smiled at her fake news voice, but it didn't turn the creases around his eyes into smile lines. Well, he'd see as the day went on how relieved she was to be here presiding over the ashes of her plans and not celebrating a misguided wedding. They picked up beach cruisers, and Carter made Lucy laugh by insisting on a girly bike because it had a basket in front where he could put his backpack. For the next 10 miles, he played tour guide with fake information. "The house on our left was once owned by the millionaire who invented the bendy straw. His name was actually Ben D. Straw, so it's not like he could invent anything else. That large boulder on the right is called the Goliath Booger because, well, look at it." "Gross. Goliath Booger? Are you 12? "Sometimes I feel like I am when I'm around you," he said, grinning. A couple of times he made her laugh so hard she swerved like she was trying to bike after a night of tequila. Around mile 11, he settled down to study the undeveloped coastline stretching down either side of the highway. She took advantage of the chance to steal glances at him, at the way he watched the passing scenery with nothing but a smile. Like enjoying the view was the only thing in the world he had to do. She loved that smile. Whatever she'd seen Carter do, he did only that thing, whether he was deep inside a coding problem for his app or people watching at the park. He was so present in a way she'd never mastered. When he listened to her, he only wanted to know what she had to say. He wasn't parsing it so he could figure out what to say next. He glanced over, and she looked away, embarrassed to be caught staring at him. She wanted to hop off her bike right that second and drag him across the sand to play in the waves, and then collapse and roll around in them with him from here to eternity style, with kisses and everything, especially the kisses. She kept her eyes on the road ahead. How was she supposed to fake just friends indefinitely? A few more quiet miles slipped by. Every now and then, Carter would ask her a question or point out a pelican or something. But to her, it felt as if her whole mission on this bike ride was to keep him from catching her staring at him, like Aaron Wellberg had often caught her doing in middle school. Love-struck and hopeful. She increased her speed, pushing the heavy beach cruiser bike to go faster. She was a grown woman, and she could keep it together, for pity's sake. She just needed breathing room to reset. "We racing?" Carter called, close behind her. Too close. She needed more space and a few minutes to get it together. "No race," she called over her shoulder. "Just getting some stuff out. Feels good." and she poured on more speed. He kept pace, and even if she hadn't been able to hear the hum of his tires, she would have sensed him there anyway. Her nerves had acquired intensely sensitive Carter antennae. It didn't take long before Carter was even with her, but she kept pushing. Her calves burned from the strain of powering the heavy bike until she morphed from a hurts so good to a just plain hurts situation. She pulled into a scenic outlook and climbed off to stretch. Carter stayed on his bike. "Let's call it a tie," he said. The wind had destroyed any remaining order to his hair, and the sight of it paired with the satisfied grin on his face was so adorable that it stopped Lucy's breath for a few seconds too long. She remembered to quit staring and inhaled on a gasp. "You okay?" Carter asked, his smile fading. "Yeah, I'm good. Winded from that sprint." She turned toward the water. "This was ridiculous. Pull yourself together, girlfriend, because you aren't going to convince anyone you're mentally stable like this." "I think I need a few minutes alone. Is that okay?" she asked, daring a glance back at him. His laugh lines had all been dragged downward with worry again. "Of course. Yeah, go ahead. Take as long as you need. I brought my camera, so I'll just stay up here and shoot." She trudged through the sand until she was a few yards short of the tide line. It was warm enough for people to be out flying kites or running, but still too cool for many of the locals to be in the water. Her research on an ideal date for a beach wedding had been dead on. This would have been a perfect day, but not one molecule of her regretted that she was sitting here in shorts and a tank instead of a wedding dress. She dug into her front pocket for the slip of paper she'd taken from her purse before leaving the hotel. True love is for the brave, not the lucky. Flecks of dried soy sauce speckled it, a reminder of the disastrous lunch where she'd gotten the cookie. It had bothered her so much then. The fact that she'd gotten her first generic fortune right after breaking her necklace. Maybe it was possible to make this as true as any fortune that had ever predicted her promotion or winning lottery numbers. "Just talk to him," her mom had said. And Lucy had told her she was afraid of ruining a good thing. That wasn't brave. What if she were brave enough to ask Carter if she was more than a project to him? She thought she was more. At the very least, she was someone fun for him to hang out with. Was that all? If she had the courage to ask, would love really favor her? It would be a lot easier to try if she knew her bravery was backed by luck, and her hand fell away from the spot where her necklace should be. She wished she had insisted on them stopping by Spyglass. A trio of seagulls to her right scattered and flew away. She looked up and found Carter trudging toward her, his backpack slung over one shoulder and his hands in his pockets. He dropped down beside her. "Sorry, you're just making me too sad. I brought you something." "Lunch?" she asked, eyeing the backpack. "Eventually. Something else first." He rose to his knees to dig in his pocket. "Why am I making you sad?" she asked. "I'm not sad." "Then you do a good imitation of it," he said on a grunt as he freed a small box. "Here, I think you've been wanting this." She took the white box with a picture of a spyglass stamped on it, and her eyes flew to his. "Open it." Her fingers fumbled over each other in her hurry to check inside. There on a bed of cotton was her necklace, but it didn't look the same. She frowned in concentration and pulled it out, letting it hang from her finger to study it more closely. The jade and its setting looked like they had the day her grandfather gave it to her. But something else hung with the pendant, a tiny charm. "You can take that off," Carter said, the words flying out of his mouth faster than their bikes had sped over the highway trail. "You know what this is?" "Yeah, it's an aspen leaf." I made a call a couple of weeks ago and asked Stella to add it, but you can remove it, and your necklace will be exactly what it was before." Lucy studied the intricate leaf done in the same gold filigree as the jade setting. "I don't understand." Carter drew his knees up to his chest and clasped his arms around them. It was casual, but in a very deliberate way. He cleared his throat and looked somewhere past her head. "I've always paid attention to you. I've seen you wear that necklace 100 times. I did a little research, and the aspen leaf symbolizes determination. Sometimes I think you think that your luck thing makes you who you are, the way that your eye color and your laugh do. But it doesn't." He met her eyes and took a deep breath. "I thought you should remember that the best parts of you have nothing to do with that necklace." She let the chain pool in her hand and touch the aspen leaf again. "I can't believe you did this," she said, awed by what he saw in her. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean— No, it's okay. I shouldn't have done it. At least I didn't have her fuse it on, right?" He rose to his knees again and dug through his backpack. She tried again. "I meant that—" He groaned at something inside his bag. "Man, I thought I had such a great idea to help you today. I was going to reverse engineer that whole day when you were down here with Flake and make this place a better memory for you. But I think I really, really suck," he said, pulling out a dripping plastic bag with the Fortune Cafe logo on it. "Looks like now that you have your necklace back, our luck is reversing already. I can't believe this exploded. I was super careful when I packed it." "Wait, you were trying to recreate the day my necklace broke?" she repeated, trying to understand his logic. "No, reverse engineer it. I mean, that's where it all fell apart, right?" She nodded slowly. She had thought that. She didn't now, but she'd put it that way to him when she'd told him about it one particularly rough night in the days after the breakup. He shrugged and set the bag down to rub at his sticky fingers with a napkin. "I know you're into signs and stuff. I thought I'd turn this day into a sign that things are getting better. New and improved necklace, lunch from the same place as last time, but I rigged the cookie with a different fortune." By now he was mumbling, whether out of embarrassment or in distraction as he tried to sop up the mess inside his backpack. Lucy wasn't sure. "You rigged my fortune cookie?" she repeated. "Yeah, that's hard, by the way," he said. "It took me like 20 tries to do it at my place. I'm just glad I was smart enough to try it at home instead of here. Because I was definitely not smart when I thought egg drop soup would be good on a bike ride." She grabbed the bag and looked for the wax pouch inside where Chinese restaurants always put the fortune cookies and the soy sauce packets. Carter looked up when the bag rustled and his eyes widened. "You don't need that," he said, taking the pouch from her fingers. "It was a stupid idea. I'm going to get this mess out of here and let you meditate or grieve some more or whatever I interrupted." "I'm not grieving. Why was it a stupid idea? I think it's amazing. Let me see the fortune." He froze for a moment, so quick she wasn't sure she'd seen the hesitation. "No, it's fine. I'm sure it's trashed anyway from the soup spill. Should be fine inside that bag. I want it." He started to stand and she tried to snatch it away from him again. But he jerked it out of her way and they both lost their balance. She pitched into his chest and knocked him flat on his back. She didn't apologize. She didn't even move. She stared down at him, into his eyes full of nothing but her. He wasn't breathing. If he was, she would have felt it against her lips. "I want the fortune," she repeated, propping herself up on her forearms but making no effort to move off of him. His eyes flicked down toward her mouth, and he shook his head. "Lucy." A tingle shot down her spine at the strain in his voice. "Yes, Carter?" she asked, relaxing into him even more. His eyes slammed shut, and she grinned. Lucy, yes? He hesitated. She didn't mind. She liked her perch. Carter? She trailed off his name and swallowed, trying again. Carter, I want to be brave. That got his eyes open. He reached up and twined his fingers through her hair, giving it a soft tug. Don't mess with me, he said, his voice soft as the breeze off the ocean. I'm not. She wiggled against him while she tried to reach behind her for the slip of paper she'd pulled from her pocket. His eyes shut again and he clenched his jaw. Lucy Lou, stop. I just need... His hands closed around her waist and held her still. I mean it. Stop. She tucked her worn fortune into his hand and slid her arms around his neck, loving the feel of the warm sand against her palms and his soft hair against the backs of her hands, her lips barely grazing his as she spoke. Read it. He held her gaze for a long moment, and the intensity of it only made her want to dip down and steal a longer kiss. He glanced at the fortune, his eyes scanning it, then darting back to her face, searching again. They were so close she could see his eyes darken, and this time the look inside them sent another shiver down her spine. Why wasn't he saying anything? She slowly righted herself and let him up. He reached into the wax bag for a homemade-looking fortune cookie, plucking the paper slip out and handing it to her. She straightened it and read the words. Maybe what you're looking for is just a balcony away. He watched her so closely she wondered if he could see the pulse jump in her neck, and she blushed. He reached for her and settled her into his lap, turning her face up to his for a kiss that would have melted her if he wasn't holding her up. His arms tight and sure, he deepened it, confident in a way that sent tingles skittering through her stomach, hotter than she'd ever have thought possible, and tasting like sweetness that was purely Carter. When he drew back enough to breathe, he rested his forehead against hers, and she wondered if he could feel how flushed her skin was. That had been good. So good. He smiled and dropped a kiss on the tip of her nose. If you're going to be brave, then I guess that means I'm very, very lucky. But his next kiss only proved that Lucy's luck was back again. This has been Love, Not Luck, written by Melanie Jacobson, narrated by Andrea Coomer.